All right. Oh, hang on one second here. 1 second. All right, give me 1 second here. I'm still trying to get it to show up on my YouTube here. Oh, and I got a package. As soon as I go live, I get a package. Give me 1 second. Thank you. My apologies. 1 second. Coming back. Oh, okay. Anyways, um, so look, let me give you a quick thing right now because I was going to have somebody come in from Facebook, but they couldn't make it tonight. So I'm trying something a little bit different. And so I will be streaming to YouTube, and hopefully you guys can hear me out there. I do have John in here, but you guys can't see that because for some reason it's not capturing. But I'm going to fix that here in a second, hopefully. There we go. There's something. I can make that work. So, anyways, John, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome. So I've been inviting people. I've been on Facebook, right? And I was going to do a struggle session, but I think plans got canceled on that, which is fine. It's going to be next week. So I want to do something different. So I was like, okay, I'll do some atheist stuff. Always a good topic, especially when I go into Facebook groups and I just see them talking about atheism and philosophy, especially epistemology, and they literally have no idea what they're talking about. So I'm going to do a little rant session going over a few things, what I've gone over many times, but I'm going to allow people on Twitter to come in and maybe kind of ask me questions because there seems to be a lot of confusion on these issues. There has been for a very long time, probably always will be, and I'm doing what I can to alleviate these issues when it comes to meta-atheism, which is the above atheism, right? It's more than just whether we're talking about the ontology of God existing. It is what is it we're talking about when we're talking about atheism, right? So it's a subject of atheism rather than the position of atheism. So we'll get started on that, but I do want to know if you guys can hear me just fine. Hank says he can hear me, so let me know where you hear the guest too. So anyways, John.
Yeah, can your chat hear me? Testing, testing.
I think so. So anyways, what you got for me? You just jumped in, and so I was asking people to kind of come on in. I do want to talk about agnostic atheism, and I want to talk about why atheists don't seem to want to ever make a claim of any kind or defend what claims they do make. It's rather infuriating, right? Because I'm not a theist. I literally have made videos on saying that I believe Christianity is false, and yet anytime I put anything out on philosophy or epistemology, I'm accused of being a theist, which is absolutely ridiculous. And by the way, thank you, Dan, for letting me know I did work very hard to get the sound quality better today than my last couple streams. So let me know if all the audio sounds better than the last two streams I did. I found some issues that I think I fixed because I think it sounded better. So let me know if I sound better, my voice is a little bit better than it was. I'm sounding better physically too. I know that as well. But as far as the mic, but anyways, John, what would you like to discuss on atheism today? And hey, Dark.
All right, so yeah, a lot of atheists, they kind of practically take the Gnostic atheist route, but when they're debating, it's far easier to take the agnostic atheist route because they don't have to defend any claims. They could just play the role of a skeptic, sometimes the role of a cynic, unfortunately. But so to be an agnostic would assume epistemic objectivity. Would you agree?
Um, I'm not sure objectivity be the word I use there because objectivity to me, when we're talking about something like moral theory, we're talking about the ability to go discover something independently and come to the same conclusion, right? That's what objective means. It doesn't mean necessarily without bias. It is, but it really means that you and I can go look at something and we can objectively come to the same conclusion no matter what. Like, for example, if you and I want to go look at a math problem, and you figure out the math problem. It's something simple, 10 minus 2 is x. Well, we both go and look and see what x is and do the math and see that it's 8. That's an objective fact that we can both do. So when we're talking about agnosticism, I don't know what you mean by objectivity there. Maybe you want to suss that out a little bit.
Sure. So when someone makes a claim saying I'm agnostic, what they're claiming and what they're articulating is I know that I don't know. Would you agree?
Well, it's kind of self-evident, right? I mean, if you don't know something, you know that you don't know it. Would you agree with that? And by the way, you're a theist, if I remember right. Catholic?
Uh, I'm not Catholic.
Oh,
I would argue theism, but I wouldn't argue specific sect.
okay. All right.
Just because I'm not competent in making those arguments.
No problem. But like I said, if you don't know something, you don't know it, right? I mean, that's it. It kind of goes hand in hand. There's actually something called the KK principle that if you know something, you know that you know it. But the reality is agnosticism isn't about knowledge when we're talking about the ontology of God. It's about the position is you don't hold the belief that there's a God, and you don't hold the belief there isn't a God. It's automatically going to imply, well, I shouldn't say it's automatically, there's other forms of knowledge out there, but for all practical purposes, that epistemically implies that you don't know something. Because if I say I don't believe P, how do you get to knowledge, right? In justified true belief, you have to have knowledge as a prerequisite for you have to have belief for a prerequisite for knowledge, because knowledge is a subset of belief, which is one of the issues I have with that whole agnostic atheist quadrant diagram that's been floating around. And I still asked somebody to join on that just a few minutes ago, but I think they're scared to do so. But go ahead.
Okay, let me think about that for a second. So
Take all the time you need.
So ultimately, would you be a sort of well? Because when I hear someone say I'm agnostic, they're assuming their essence exists for one. They're assuming I exist, and then they assume that they know that they don't know, and then not only that, I'm assuming you're gonna go the route of I'm a claimless. I'm not taking the stance of agnosticism. You're just you just don't subscribe to theism. Is that what you would say?
No, I'm an agnostic. I don't subscribe to atheism nor theism. I am an agnostic. I don't have a position either way. That is my claim. That is my epistemic claim. It is unfortunately a position that cannot be true because agnosticism is not truth apt, therefore it's not propositional, and it cannot be true or false, but it is epistemically warranted when you have insufficient reason to come to a conclusion either way. So epistemically, I am correct to take that position of agnosticism, but in the reality, agnosticism cannot be true or cannot be false, and so it's just a position where you don't make a conclusion either way. Would you agree?
Well, no, I wouldn't necessarily agree because agnosticism absent a being, yeah, that is the lack of a claim. But to say I'm agnostic, now that's another story. You see where I'm going with this?
No, because if I say I'm agnostic, that means I'm agnostic on the proposition, which means I have no conviction either way. For any proposition, it doesn't matter what the proposition is. Could it be on God or anything else? If somebody said, "Hey, Steve, do you think there's life on other planets, intelligent life on other planets?" And I say, "Well, I'm agnostic on that proposition." That's not making a claim about knowledge. What that's saying, what that's imparting, is that I don't have a position that there is intelligent life on other planets, and I don't have a position that there isn't. If I was, I tend to believe that there is life out there and intelligent. But if I took the agnostic position, I just have a belief in that I haven't been able to come to a conclusion either way, which is why agnosticism is considered to be a second order belief, which I had to try to explain to someone on Facebook today, because they're so adamant that not believing in something is not a belief, but it's not a direct belief. It's an indirect belief about a belief is what it is. That's why they call it a second order belief.
Okay, I guess my problem is that you can't claim to be an agnostic without some sort of justification for your being.
Well, I mean, I could claim to be agnostic because my justification is I don't have sufficient reason to believe or disbelieve. That's my reason. I mean, I can get into the specificities of why I don't have sufficient reason, but those are the justifications. The justifications are based upon an evidential and rational approach. I believe in more of a combined thing for rationalism and empiricism for evidentialism. Right? I don't think one or the other should be taken to an extreme. I think both should be put together and kind of put into a more compactified approach. I think they call it contextualism.
Okay, could you articulate a way to say that you're agnostic without saying I or referencing your essence?
Well, no, because I'm referring to myself, right? I'm referring to myself as what you're asking me what my position is. So I'm going to be self-referential. Matter of fact, when I say to somebody, my beliefs, those are all autobiographical. Those are all self-referential, right? I mean, so I've really no onus to prove anything or to explain anything unless I decide to have a conversation. If I decide to have a conversation, then I have a burden of discussion. If I decide to persuade somebody, then I have a burden of persuasion. But I have no onus merely because I'm giving you my dosastic state. If somebody asks me, hey, Steve, do you believe that there's intelligent life on other planets? And I say, yes, I do. Then they have no follow-up unless they want to discuss it, and I want to discuss it, right? They can't just say, well, what's your evidence, what's your proof? But like, it's irrelevant because I'm not willing to have that conversation. Or, oh, let's dive into it, right? But you're asking somebody the question, does God exist? That's asking the person. Who else is it directed to? If you're not directing, not you specifically, John, but if you're asking the question to somebody, does God exist? Clearly you're asking an individual. You've already assumed that person exists. You've already assumed that reality exists. You've already made those justifications for the prior commitments that you need, called faith-based commitments or properly basic beliefs, or Wittgenstein called them hinge commitments, that all these things have already happened. So there's a lot of, obviously assumptions and presuppositions, but that's fine. But by merely asking the question, you've already acknowledged those presuppositions, have you not?
Yeah, I would agree that I acknowledge those presuppositions, but I would say how could the agnostic, the skeptic, acknowledge those presuppositions of their being is my entire point.
Well,
I
those are
think we
two
are
different
speaking
things.
past each other a little bit more.
Those are two different things. Skepticism is two different things.
Elaborate.
Well, okay. Well, the main form of skepticism is either what's called academic skepticism or Pyrrhonic. God dang it. Pyrrhonic skepticism. Pyrrhonism. And the two different types of skepticisms basically are that knowledge is unattainable. We can't ever get knowledge, and the other position is that we don't even know if we can have knowledge or not. So skepticism in philosophy is a position that knowledge is not something that we can ever actually obtain, and it's all beliefs. Now, I don't believe that. I do believe in knowledge, right? I do accept that we can know things, but I think you're talking about the skepticism as in just ordinary doubt that you see a lot of atheists try to promote. Hey, you see a claim about some kind of paranormal activity, and that they say, well, I doubt that, or I'm skeptical of that, and they should be. Right, that's ordinary doubt skepticism, but in philosophy, skepticism has a very different meaning.
Yeah, I mean, I could I'll just summarize what I'm saying, and maybe I can make it more clear. I'm taking the ultimate skeptic route, as if I was agnostic, any way to articulate that I'm agnostic would have to reference my being, and referencing my being would assume my being's real. So, do you have justification for being?
I take it axiomatically, non-justified. Now, there are some positions in foundationalism where you can justify properly basic beliefs non-dosastically, and I'm fine with people doing that. But as far as taking a properly basic belief, you don't need to justify it. They're literally non-justifiable, at least dosastically. So you're asking a question that kind of makes no sense, right? Because when you take a properly basic belief, you're acknowledging this belief is unjustified, unjustifiable, unwarranted, unwarrantable, unrevisable. It's a whole bunch of conditions that go into accepting that you have a properly basic belief. And so I'm very happy with just leaving it as a properly basic belief. Now, if I want to try to justify it non-inferentially, it'd be very difficult for me because I haven't really looked at it in a while. But it is possible. People have done it. Some people even argue that foundationalism is axiomatically justified, right? Just like a brute fact. They just call it a brute fact, and that it is self-justified. Now, I'm not a big fan of that approach, but I've read different variations where people will argue that it's self-referential and therefore self-justification or self-justifiable. But even still, I don't think it matters, right? If I just tell you that I'm just going to take it as an unjustified belief, okay, go. Then what? Axiom, you got one sec. Axiom, you got some background noise. Can you when you're not? Yeah, I think. Oh, yeah, so much.
I'm sorry. Was there a question at the end there? I didn't catch that.
Yeah, what's the difference whether I justify a properly basic belief or not? Because most people accept them without justification.
So wait, could you one more time?
Why would it matter if I justify a properly basic belief or not? Because properly basic beliefs are non-justifiable, at least dosastically. They're non-inferential. They're assumed as a precondition for intelligibility.
Sure. So you're saying why should you have to justify axioms? Sure.
Right. They're axioms.
I would say that because an ultimate skeptic would just constantly
I'm
repeat
not
the
an ultimate
question
skeptic.
why.
I'm not an ultimate skeptic,
Well,
so
right, but you need ultimate justification to 100% epistemically know something.
no, you don't. The a
Well,
priori
I
knowledge.
mean, you would say that because you assume axioms are true, but ultimately,
Well, still, but
it's just you're saying at the end of the day, axioms are just taking faith.
not all. No, not all. No, no, no. Certain axioms. A priori knowledge is not taken upon faith. That's not a faith-based commitment. Can you think of a single solitary case where all of x equals x fails to be true? Because it cannot be false in any possible world. It's true in all possible
Well,
worlds, and so I'm certain of that. I'm absolutely certain of
well,
that.
my conceptions are limited. I can't think of I'm not an all-powerful mind.
It wouldn't matter. That's just
Why
you
wouldn't it
have the
matter?
radical
What if?
you have the radical skepticism now, not me. I can't think of a single instance where all of x equals x will fail to be the case, because it's a logical tautology, and if it's a logical tautology, that means it's a metaphysical truth that exists in every single possible world. And unless you have a defeater for that, then you're talking about radical skepticism because you don't have a counter to that argument. You don't have even and you don't even have anything that undercuts it. Now,
No. For example, like the laws of logic, like the law of non-contradiction, an all-powerful being can override the laws that he created. So God, for example, can override the law of non-contradiction. I don't think that applies. That's an axiom. I don't think that applies in all levels of reality.
wait, are you positing a God that can violate the eternal verities?
100%, I believe he created them.
Okay, that's unusual. Most Christians don't do that because they hold that the eternal verities are part of either God's nature or something outside of Him. Um, I've seen arguments either way. I do like the argument, and I don't agree with this particular argument because I'm not a theist, but I do think it's a better approach for a theist to argue that the logical verities, the things that are eternal when it comes to logical axioms, um, are part of his nature, and therefore he kind of violate themselves any more than we can violate, our own existence. I mean, this is the fundamental aspect of God that they would argue. Now, when it comes to the law of non-contradiction or the law of excluded middle, those are violated all the time in other forms of logic, right? There are forms of logic that don't use those, right? There's paraconsistent logic and dialtheistic logic that have truth gaps and truth gluts and don't use them. The only law of logic that I've seen that basically every single variation of logic I've ever seen at all uses is a law of identity, which is not even propositional. Other axioms are taken as needed, right? So when you say violate the law of excluded middle, well, in other logics you can. So I don't think that you need a deity to do that.
Well, I want to make two different points here. I would say first, I don't believe a priori knowledge is possible absent God. But before we get to that point, let's see here. I also don't think the law of non-contradiction can be violated without God. How could you show me an example of such a thing?
I don't think law of non-contradiction could be violated in classical logic, but in non-classical logic, then you can. Paraconsistent logic is a form of logic that holds that you can have contradictions without principle of explosion. That's the whole point of having paraconsistent logic. A Flamo for $2 on YouTube says, God is not limited by logic, Steve. Well, I think a lot of theists aren't limited by logic, but neither are some atheists. So, but thank you, Hank. And I think that's wrong, though. And I don't mean that like from just my position. I think that's wrong as Christians don't normally argue that. Christians normally argue that God is limited by logic because, like Swinburne argues that God is narrow, logically contingent, that he's not even logically necessary. And I think that Swinburne is right on this. If God exists, then he would be maybe metaphysically necessary, but logically contingent. And there's reasons for that, which we can get into later. But just to say that, like the law of non-contradiction, you just have a case where you have something what's called dialtheism that exists, where you have both the case where proposition is true or false, which is allowed for in paraconsistent logic. Right? I mean, have you looked at paraconsistent logic?
No, I haven't. Could you give me an example?
Yeah, I wrote in my blog something on Kantian approach, but I don't remember exactly what I said. But I remember something along the lines of the example that Stanford Encyclopedia uses, and the example would be the example of a married bachelor, which is again analytics in a priori synthetic according to Kant. That something like a married bachelor would be obviously a contradiction by the ways these words are defined, rather than a priori knowledge. which you say doesn't exist without God, which makes no sense, but we'll get back to that. But a married bachelor would be somebody like, for example, let's say you're on a ship and you're off the coast of some island, and you get married to somebody off the coast, but you're in international waters, but you're in the border of some other country, and so in one case that you're married in some case, and in some case that you're not married, depending on if you're on that border between the country that you're supposed to be getting married in and international water. That's why they have fuzzy logic for that very kind of same reason. So what they use diatheistic logic for is for allowing those types of contradictions where it's not quite one way or the other without being able to prove everything. Because if you start with a contradiction, you can literally prove anything. It won't be sound, but I mean valid-wise, it'll be the case. And that's called the principle of explosion. But there are cases where you may want to talk about somebody who is both married and not married at the same time, such as somebody who is pronounced man and wife in international waters, but in some other country recognized as married, but not maybe perhaps the one that they came from. That's kind of what the SEP uses as an example of paraconsistent logic. It just means that you can have a contradiction without everything going to hell.
Okay, this is very interesting. I've actually considered this. Not your specific example, and I'm not familiar enough to actually answer to that. But I'll give an example. I think that is just a category error, and here's why. So John Gidier, like he has his Gidier problems. You're familiar with him, I'm sure.
Of course, absolutely.
And you have like, for example, if someone's pointing at a barn, and they say that's a barn, but it's a cutout of a barn, they would be false, right?
Yeah, but that's
But
not
if they have a
paraconsistent
barn,
logic. That's
you know where I'm going with this, right? So
oh yeah, no,
how's
it's
that?
it's
Right.
yeah, it's fake barn. It's called a fake barn analogy that get a year.
Right.
But that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. The fake barn analogy has to do with you're traveling through a city, and you're driving through this small town, and all around you are barns, and you have a passenger, which I think he used the case of his son, and he said, hey, points to a barn and says, there's a barn. But that barn wasn't a real barn. What it was it's a sign for a barn. It was a facade. It's like, a sign, you have one face and you have the struts. It was just like that. It was just a cutout. It wasn't a real barn. So the argument was made that that's not actual knowledge, right? Because if he says, I know that's a barn, he didn't meet the criteria for justification, because there's this epistemic luck that all the other barns happen to be real, but the one he pointed at wasn't. And then if he points to another barn that was, same thing. It's just luck. And so the argument was that didn't satisfy the three necessary conditions, called necessary conditions, of believing that the proposition is true, believing that the proposition is true, that it is true, and that you're justified to believe it's true. So the Gidier problem with the fake barn was just saying that when he points to a barn and it's not an actual barn, then it doesn't even meet the truth condition. So it's not, you can't know something if it's not true. Right? If it's a fake barn, then
Right.
I
get the Platonic
that's not
definition of knowledge.
diatheism. That's not a contradiction, though. Paraconsistent logic deals with contradictions. Something is and is not at the same time.
Well, no. Well, your example was a little bit different from the one I was going to give. I was going to say if they pointed at the cutout of the barn, and they said that's a barn, they would be wrong. But if there was a barn behind the cutout, will they suddenly be right?
No.
Now,
because of epistemic
so
luck. Epistemic luck is the position that because you were right, just because you got lucky, doesn't count as justified true belief. This is why Zach Zizbesky tried to argue against reliabilism, because reliabilism tried to argue that as long as something is reliable, it's considered to be knowledge. And she said no, because in every single knowledge first belief theory, you're going to have the possibility of epistemic luck. You can't get away from it. So all of them have Gidier problems, but it's still luck. If I look at my clock, let's say I look at my clock right now. My clock says 6:24 Pacific time, but 6:25. So let's say that my clock was wrong, though. Let's say that it was set incorrectly. How would I argue this?
You're arguing for epistemic luck because you're making an example. Yeah, correct? I get it. I understand.
Let's say that it was set for, like I said, 6:25 p.m. is what it says right now. But let's say that it was 6:25 a.m. I woke up in the morning. I look at my clock, and I said 6:25, but I don't know it says p.m. I just happen to know that it's 6:25 in a.m. I get to work and it's 6:25 a.m. and I think everything is fine. Or if my clock broke, right? If it's an analog broke, and let's say it's 6:25 that the clock struck, got stuck on, so it's not even moving. But I look at the clock and say it's 6:25 in the morning. I got to get up. I get up, go to work, everything's fine, and then I come home and find that the clock wasn't working. I cannot say that I knew that it was 6:25 time to get up, because it was luck that made it that way, rather than an actual case. That's what the Getty Air problems are about.
Sure, I guess I didn't understand your example from earlier, the unmarried water, if you'd like to give that again.
Yeah, because because the bachelor is both bachelor and married at the same time. Because
How so?
because he's in international water, and there might be legalities whether he's actually married or not, or which country he's married to. Some might consider him married, some might consider him not married. There are times where contradictions might exist because not everything is cut and dry.
Right, but that's a subjective title rather than
I
a
agree.
truth logical claim. So I get your point, though.
But what do you assign it when you only have one proposition? If I say John is married, well, it's true in one view and false in another view. So it could be both depending on how you look at it, right? So that's why you're able to, especially when you're doing stuff for like computer programming. Computers have to be able to be able to analyze contradictions without it, creating an error. So you have to use a logic different than classical logic in some cases, because if not, the computer's going to go, A and not A, error. You can't have that. So there are times where something may or may not be the case at the same time, and that's usually because of legalities or other factors. But yeah, only because of the proposition John is married. Well, it's true in one view and false in another view. And there's other ways of looking at falsities as well when it comes to propositions that may not even have an ontological case. Like if I say Superman can fly, is that true or false? Well, it depends, right? If you're looking at fictionalism, then yes, Superman can fly. If you're looking at it from a different point of view without looking at the fictional case, then no, Superman can't fly because Superman doesn't exist. So there's called a referential failure there. There's no referential things there. There's nothing that points to anything, right? Superman doesn't exist, therefore he cannot fly, because there's nothing about him that's true or false. And so the proposition Superman can fly is true within fictionalism, but false in other versions of looking at how to determine truth values for a proposition.
Sure, I would just say that isn't violating the law of non-contradiction. That's just either a lack of context or subjective subjective meaning that is only subjectively granted by the individual, or what the individual would claim, whether, like, for example, the marriage. Some people would say they're married, some people would say they want it. I don't think that has truth value, though. I think that's a subjective claim.
I don't think that makes a difference, though. It's still the proposition is true or false depending on how you look at things. The point is that it allows for these types of contradictions without having that principle of explosion. I mean, there's also I don't know if you ever read like Frege's Sense and Reference. His sense and reference has a different way of looking at it. Russell has a different way of looking at it. He has, of course, called it a descriptive approach. Wittgenstein has syntactical structuralism that he uses. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at these propositions to say, okay, how do I determine whether this proposition is true or false? I tend to go with a sense and reference approach, but that's just my view.
Yeah, I just think that the law of logic can't be violated. The law of non-contradiction cannot be violated when the essence of the claim has truth value. But we can move on from that. I think I can.
Then you should go look at. You definitely should look at sense and reference, because that's exactly what he argues. He argues that the sentence of itself, the reference, has a truth value, and if it has a truth value, then how are we interpreting, and in what sense are we interpreting that proposition in order to determine whether that truth value is true or not? Because that's really important, the sense of that reference.
Sure. Yeah, I'll look into that.
Okay.
I can't talk
I don't know
about
how, I
that
don't know
right
how we
now.
got
I'm just
that
uninformed,
on this
but
from agnostic
um,
atheism and atheism. Let's go, whatever.
well, sure. We were talking about the
Yeah.
axioms and how they're
Speaking of
unjustified.
which,
But
axiom. Hi, I didn't mean to cut you off, by the way. Axiom, did you want to add something? or not. Okay, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I had a
Oh, wait.
question for Steve, real quick.
Yes.
You said you're agnostic.
Yes.
So my question there is how sure are you that God does not exist or does exist? Do you have any
I
sort of bias one way or the other?
Yeah, I lean about 60% non-existence, maybe 65.
65% non-existent.
Yeah.
What would convince you that God exists?
God coming down and saying hi.
And just
Literally, I mean, literally, if God revealed Himself, it would be kind of harder to ignore that, just like it would be anything else, right? I mean,
but like what?
literally, I mean, if the skies opened up and big old things said, "I am Yahweh" or Allah or whatever, and and booming voices and trumpets and all this other stuff, I'd be going, and earthquakes, I'd be going, yeah, this sucks, kind of thing. But yeah, okay, God exists. Now what? Now where do we go from here? Is he a being worth worshiping? Yeah, you probably would because of fear, right? A lot of people even in Nazi Germany obviously didn't agree with it, but they went along with it because of fear. So we would have to determine whether God was the Old Type of Testament God, which is very vengeful and angry, which I don't think was a very moral agent. As a matter of fact, I would consider the Old Testament God to be a moral monster, or the New Testament God of the love, 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 turn the other cheek, that kind of stuff. That'd be cool. I could be okay with that, right? So it really would depend on what type of God is revealing Himself. But it would, if God revealed Himself, why would you not believe it? Why would that not be any as a form of evidence, just like anything else?
Well, my question there would be, say that did happen. How would you differentiate between a being impersonating God and God itself?
I wouldn't care less if they were able to do that. I'm gonna assume that they're a God until otherwise. If they're able to make that kind of power, then so be it. I'd just be wrong. But we don't formulate our beliefs on what we can be wrong about. We formulate our beliefs based upon the best information at the time. And if the best information at the time is that there's earthquakes and people rising from the dead and literally coming back to life, I'm not going to think that it's aliens. I'm going to think, okay, there's been people that have talked about this before. It is probably more likely that it is a God. And if I find out that it isn't a God, it's some kind of, Q being that has been impersonating a God, then I just change my belief again. That's called belief revisionism. I don't see a problem with that.
Yeah, it just seems to me like you'd be taking it on faith that
No.
some being shows up and it can do magic tricks,
Why
and
would
then
it
we're
be on
like,
faith?
okay, well then you're God.
Faith means there's no evidence for something, really. I mean, faith-based commitments, and that means you have no justification either way. If I have justification to believe something, that's not on faith. That's the antithesis
Well, what I'm
of on
saying,
faith.
say it's like a scenario where it's like the TV show V, some beings show up and they do the trumpets and they can make earthquakes, and okay, well that's enough to convince you.
Yes.
Really, these are just
Yeah.
beings that are more advanced than us.
Yes.
That can
Okay.
do these things. That doesn't mean they're God.
Okay,
right?
but I would be convinced until I had reasons to believe that they're aliens. I mean, I don't understand why we were so scared about having false beliefs.
Why wouldn't you just say they're aliens?
Do you have any evidence they're aliens?
Well, do you have any evidence they're God?
Well, no, yeah.
Steve.
Hang on one sec. We would, right? Because the historically people have talked about rising from the dead. People have talked about earthquakes and trumpets and angels appearing and all this other stuff. And literally, if somebody rose from the dead, I'm not going to think it's aliens. I'm going to think it's a miracle of some kind, probably. I think that's probably a rational approach to take. I mean,
a leap of faith, which would you be taking there?
It's not a leap of faith.
Not to label this just aliens that are more technologically advanced. You'd actually be taking that other leap and say, well, we're going to go to the ultimate level.
No.
And this is God.
That's not even what
I think I can
Kierkegaard
ask
meant
a
by
clarifying
this.
question.
That's what you're saying.
No.
Actually,
Go ahead.
Let me ask him a clarifying question.
Mm-hmm.
So, would you act as though it was God and be open-minded to the idea that it was aliens, or would you assume with belief that it was God?
No, I mean, I couldn't have absolute certainty of this. I mean, there's always the possibility of anything, right? But you go with the best evidence.
Yeah, but I'm saying you would just be jumping to that conclusion. I mean,
no, it wouldn't be jumping to the conclusion. It'd be based upon other evidences that we've learned about over the 2,000 years of people talking about this stuff. So let me ask you, Axiom, if that happened, what evidence would you have of it being aliens? And you can't say V because that's some story. What evidence about people would you believe that it was?
What that is evidence of is evidence of some type of being or beings that are more advanced than humans, but it doesn't mean that they're automatically a god. So that's what I'm saying.
I didn't claim that.
I'm not
that's
saying.
not what I claimed.
Well, I'm saying you did. You said that you would call it God until you get more information.
That's not automatically the case, right? I think you're confusing your terminology here. Right? There's no entailment there. It's no automatically it must be a god. It's just that the likelihood of it being a god, in my opinion, would be far more likely given what we understand about people's beliefs.
There you go. You would fall under the it's a god umbrella. So I'm saying, why wouldn't you just fall under these are aliens that are more advanced than us?
When I see people rising from the dead, earthquakes, and Jesus appearing in the sky, and trumpets and angels as predicted by revolutions, which again I don't believe in, then I'm going to be like, that's probably the case. That's more evidential to me than hypothetically aliens that we don't even know if exist or not. We've never seen an alien either, but whatever.
I hear you, but like trumpets in the sky, or like Jesus appearing in the sky, they can do that now with drones. They can do that now with like sound systems and stuff like that.
I understand that, but that's just radical.
These aren't like you don't need to appeal to like some type of self-aware being outside of space and time to theorize this could happen.
How about if you died and then you came back years later? Would that be convincing? Or you think it's alien?
Well, that's like cryogenics, where you can freeze people and bring them back. This is all within the realm of the theoretical.
Well, that's what we're talking about, right? I mean, neither one of us are theists, right? So if your body was just disintegrated, and then 10,000 years later you pop back up, resurrected, talking to God, and He's like, "I'm gonna send you back down to Earth," and you go back to Earth 10,000 years from now. I'm sorry, but I think it's kind of irrational to think that's going to be aliens or something. And again, I don't know what the fear is. I don't understand why we're so fear about having false beliefs.
No, I hear what you're saying. I'm just saying, how would you justify that belief? It sounds like you're taking a leap of faith to, okay, you're God. You appear in the sky, it's God. I said to say, I think you should be at the very least agnostic about it and say, I don't know that this is God. It could be aliens, and we need more of a system to justify that God leap. That's all I'm saying.
No, I don't think that makes sense at all. Because you're basically implying radical skepticism there, that it could be anything, right? These are called bare possibilities. Russell made it very clear that bare possibilities bloat your ontology. And so, yeah, I wouldn't think that makes sense at all to me. But again, I think that if it actually happened, Axiom, and I don't mean to be disparaging, but I do think that if it actually happened, most people would be like, "Holy crap!" and they would probably shit themselves. Let's be honest. Okay, I mean,
well, most people believe now.
Well, yeah, but if even they would shit themselves, right? Especially the fact that all of them don't agree on the same type of God, right? So, I mean, John didn't. I don't remember what John said his type of belief was, but let's say that he does go up against some kind of Catholic, and then you have some kind of Jew, and then you have some kind of Mormon, you have some kind of Pentecostal, and then you have some kind of evangelist and Islam. Well, there's only going to be one version that's correct. The other people are going to be like, "Oh shit," right?
They already do that now. They already, say, "Oh shit, I got to believe because I'm afraid of how," or whatever, No,
you misunderstand. They're going to say, "Oh shit," because they got the wrong version that they had, right? If God said, "Hey, look, I exist and Islam is right," all the Christians are going to be going, "Holy damn it," right? They're not going to be happy, right? What would happen if hypothetically, let's say that Islam is correct? Don't you think Christians would be quite upset by this?
Well, in that scenario, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
But you also have to take into consideration the being you're talking to may not be God.
Okay, so what?
That's what I'm saying. It's like, to me, that just seems like a complete leap of faith to say, okay, some being is talking to us in a way we've never heard before. That must be God.
When people rise from the dead, which I think is something that is ontologically and biologically impossible without some kind of supernatural intervention, then it's consistent with my webs of belief that only a supernatural causation can bring people back from the dead. I don't.
So you think it's beyond, like the human? Yes. You think it's beyond human capacity to be able to raise people from the dead? Like say somebody's dead for like 5 minutes or 10 minutes.
No. We're talking about dead. We're talking.
Well, that's dead. I'm saying they're dead for an hour. Let's say.
No.
And then they.
Those are called, but they're not brain dead. Right,
okay, I'm saying brain dead. I'm saying they're brain dead. They are dead for a half an hour.
Well, I don't care about a half an
hour. Or an hour, or whatever you want to say. They are dead, and then we have the technology to bring them back.
No, there's still neuronic activity. We understand that they're not. When we're talking about death, we're talking about a irreversible process where your ion channels open up, and there's no way to recover from that. right? You're no longer having ion channels between the sodium and the potassium ion channels in your brain. There's no neuronic activity. There's nothing. It has ceased to exist. It is now an inert object like a rock. That will happen over a period of time, but it doesn't necessarily happen right away. We know that people can survive at minimal levels, and then they are brought back. But tell me, Axiom.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about surviving at minimal level. I'm talking about dead. Like somebody gets shot up, full of bullet holes, and it's an hour later. That person is dead now. Okay. We would classify that person as dead. And to say it's beyond our capability to bring them back, I think it can be. Why would we?
Philosophy dead. So if you don't have a body anymore, you were disintegrated. Do we have technology to bring you back from the dead?
Now we're talking about something different. Yeah, so that's a different form of death, right? Now you got a different stage of it.
It doesn't matter.
But it's still dead.
It's still dead, right? If you saw somebody that was was disintegrated, right? Wasn't a hoax, but disintegrated, and that got brought back, you would not think that was supernatural?
Not automatically, but I would ask you this: if the same scenario happened and the guy was just shot, and it's like 5 hours later, and he's actually dead, you would classify that person as dead too, right?
No.
You wouldn't classify. You don't classify people that are like had a heart attack and now they're flatlined and they've been in that state for a week. No. They're not dead to you.
No, because
what do you call them?
It's called Lazarus syndrome. There's a name for it. Lazarus syndrome. There's literally a medical name for that.
As they're burying him into the coffin, you don't think that person's dead?
Yeah,
that's interesting. That's interesting.
I don't believe that we can come back from actual death.
Well, I'm talking about things that are classified medically dead today. Well, that's what I'm saying.
But that's medically dead. That's not philosophically dead.
Well, that's kind of cheap though, because you would define death as what you do not come back from,
right?
And then you could say, right. So isn't that like a contradiction in itself?
No, because I believe we can't come back from the dead. But if somebody rose up, like I said, disintegrated, then I'll take notice. But we know medically people come back. Well, there's still brain activity.
If God raised someone back from the dead, you would just say he was never dead. No.
No, if their body was disintegrated, there's no way to raise that. There's no medical explanation for that. There's no natural explanation I can find for that.
But even right now, if somebody's been dead for a week, we can't bring them back.
Again, it would be a case by case because there is still
no, it's not a case by case. They're dead for a week. I mean, they're dead.
Yeah.
Though we have no means to bring them back. But for you to classify that as that, you're classifying them as not dead.
No.
They're dead.
No, they're dead unless they came back, in which case they were never dead.
They can't. We can't. Nobody's ever come back from that we know about.
Right.
I mean, in modern times.
Right. They're dead.
That's what I'm saying. So it's like, okay, so they're dead. They're by any reasonable definition. They've been gone for a week. They're all shot up. But it doesn't mean that we won't get to the point where we can't bring them back as humans, though.
I believe that we can't. Again, if your body's gone, your mind's gone, your brain's dead, you have no brain, your brain's gone, you're not going to come back.
Time will tell.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, that's what belief revisionism is about. But the way I would apply it would be this. Matter of fact, it goes back to the topic of knowledge versus belief. I wrote an essay called The Principle of Attribution and Retraction, trying to explain to people that we do not have false knowledge. We do not say that our knowledge was false. What we say is that we have a false belief if something was wrong, but if our knowledge turned out to be not the case, we retract that claim to knowledge. We don't retract the claim to belief because we did believe. So, for example, if I say I believe it's going to rain tomorrow, and tomorrow it didn't rain, it wasn't that I never believed it. I did believe it, right? And so I had a belief. It was false. But if I claim to say I know it's going to rain tomorrow, and then it doesn't rain, I didn't have a false knowledge. I had a false belief, which means that I never had knowledge to begin with. And so I would have to retract that claim of knowledge and saying that I was not correct in my assertion of having knowledge, because knowledge must
you got lucky. Mm-hmm. You were lucky. I would ask you, Steve, on this point though. Say that whatever process that brought you into being, because at one point you didn't exist. Your particles were everywhere, and all of a sudden these particles come together. They form Steve. Mm-hmm. Imagine. Okay, so you're disintegrated now. Mm-hmm. Your particles are everywhere again. The same process that brought those particles together initially, why couldn't that process happen again? And I'll give you an example. I'll add more on top of that. Say we are a simulation, and we are just all simulated minds. We're just little bits of data that come together in a simulation. And you have the person running the simulation who brings you into existence, spreads you all across the hard drive, and then brings you right back. That being wouldn't necessarily be God. It would just be some type of person, who can create these simulations. So even there, so I would say even in that scenario where particles are all spread out and back together, you're disintegrated, you wouldn't necessarily invoke a god for that process either.
I thought you were going to go with panpsychism, to be honest with you. You should have gone with panpsychism. Again, bare possibilities. There's an infinite amount of bare possibilities. It's possible that a flying a flying unicorn that shits silver dollars and farts rainbows and all this other shit can exist, and that can magically make somebody rise from the dead. That's possible. It's definitely logically possible. I don't know about metaphysically possible, or at least certainly not nomologically possible. But it's a bare possibility. All those things are bare possibilities. I don't base my epistemic beliefs on bare possibilities. I go with the best evidence provided at the time and formulate my positions in a very coherent manner.
Yeah, it's also possible that humans can create gods and then have other humans believe those gods are true.
Right.
So, by various means, whether it be like magic or written word. So it's also possible that if the scenario happened that you're talking about, people rose from the dead, trumpets in the sky, that it's not God. It's aliens. It's another being. It's a IT guy in a hard drive.
What would convince you?
We can't just jump to God automatically. It's a unjustified leap in my view.
What would convince you that God exists? Give me your example.
So the first step would be, I think, is direct evidence too. But that's really the key question. What I see here is like a premature rush to anointing something or an idea God, a people God, an idea God. All throughout history, Zeus, Quetzalcoatl, all these today, yeah, that's God. There was a burning bush 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. That's God.
But here's the thing: there's a difference, though, because I think you're underestimating my intelligence here. No offense, Axiom. It would have to be significant, right? It would have to be a significant display, not just burning bush.
But what's a significant display?
Well, basically, if God took you up into heaven, right, and the earth has passed away, and you're whatever, or hell or whatever, these things are going to have influence on our belief things. Now, again, I don't think anything that's true, right? But it is possible, and so you're just talking about bare possibilities of what ifs, and I don't think that you're being as direct on it as you should, because if there's an infinite being, if something that's that powerful, you're going to be scared shitless. I don't think you're going to stand there in face of this being, whether it's a alien or not. You'd have no idea what's going to happen, right? You're going to be scared whether it's a god or it's an alien. Let me tell you, we're all going to be shitting bricks if that happened. Would you not agree?
Shitting bricks doesn't mean it's God, though. It just means you're shitting bricks.
But
just a fear response.
That. But reality is, though, there's more evidence of people talking about this stuff for 2,000 years and some kind of alien race that would do this. And if it was an alien race, then so be it. Well, I just revised my position. So what?
Alien race could be people simulating a universe. That's why I'm saying we just can't jump to God automatically.
A bare possibility, but I don't believe in simulation theory.
No, I hear you, but I'm just saying it seems to be a jump. We need a better way to figure out if we're actually dealing with a God itself, not just something impersonating God, which has been the march of history. That's been the overall march of history all throughout history. All these cultures were tricked.
When you think about
before us.
When you figure out what that
I hear you.
That is.
I hear you.
And I'm fixing my headphones here. Hey Dan, welcome. And Seamus, I see you out there. Hang on, I'm going to talk to somebody because I got to fix my headphones here.
Hi. You hear me all right?
Yeah.
I just one quick thing. Axiom, could you lower your gain just a smidge, because it's pretty loud comparing to everybody else.
I'm sorry. Like I said, I was fixing my headphones. What did you say?
Yep. Oh, just that Axiom was very loud, so that was
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what about it. But otherwise, good talk. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm your
Thanks.
friend. I don't have
I see
anything.
You over there on YouTube with Tom and everybody else over there. Hi, Tom. But anyways, let's get back on the on topic here. That's fine. That's a good topic. But again, I think it's individual preference. And again, since probably not that's going to happen, I don't think it's something to really dwell upon, because it's certainly not going to happen anytime soon. And I think that if there is alien life out there, they're not coming to our planet.
But I had a question. Does it really matter if there's a godlike being in the universe versus being an actual god? Is it something
It's a
that
distinction without a difference to me. I'm okay with calling that a god.
Oh.
It's really a distinction without a difference. If somebody's so omnipotent where they're creating simulation theory, where we are, just a creation of electrical impulses and bytes and bits, yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm going to call it God. I have no issue with that. But even still, I don't think that's the case, right? At all. There's major problems with simulation theory. Although it sounds good on paper, but the main problem with simulation theory is there's just not enough information or time to do any of this stuff. It would require a bigger computer than the entire universe. Now, I do believe in holographic principle, though. I do accept that. If you guys are familiar with the holographic principle, I think that's absolutely the case. But that's another topic. But anyway, John, go ahead. Dan. No, go ahead, Dan.
Oh, no, I'll let
John
John go.
Okay.
I just want to make sure I understood the difference between holographic theory and the other thing.
Holographic theory is basically the principle that everything in the universe, the information, is encoded on a two-dimensional membrane on the observable universe, the outskirts of the observable universe, called the Hubble's volume. So imagine like a hologram where you have a two-dimensional surface and you shine a light through it, it produces a three-dimensional object. Basically, information is such that it's all encoded on this two-dimensional membrane, so to speak. It's not really a membrane, but a two-dimensional mathematical representation around the entire universe that has all the information encoded in a very, very, very high entropic state of everything that's three-dimensional inside that universe. And it works. It works not just for the universe, but we know it kind of works for black holes. That's where it came from, black hole theory. And we also know that it works for just like the room that I'm in. Like all the walls in my room, right? Four walls, top, bottom, ceiling, floor. Everything that's happening in my room right now is encoded information to the exact amount of surface area of those walls, believe it or not. That's holographic principle. So the amount of information required to accurately describe all the three-dimensional states in the room is exactly the same amount of information that's allowed by quantum squares called qubits on the surface area of the walls and ceiling and floor of my room. How's that? That's interesting, huh? That's holographic theory in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think that's a bit too deep for where I'm at.
Did I blow your mind?
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of hard to conceptualize or to apply anyway.
It's not really, if you think about it. I mean, think about it. If you look at black holes, right? I know we're diverging from this topic, and I'll get back to John, I promise. But think about black holes, right? In a black hole, all the information of everything that falls into it is encoded on the surface area of the black hole in a very high entropic state. This was the firewall paradox, right, between Leonard Susskind and Stephen Hawking, because Hawking argued that information was destroyed and Susskind argued that it wasn't, and now it's foundational that information is not destroyed. It's conserved, and how it's conserved is it encodes itself on the surface area of that black hole. So everything that's gone into that black hole, that information is stored on that black hole.
Yeah, because of the time dilation. About is that it? It's because everything remains on the event horizon because
it's not really time dilation. It's just because because two different theories were approached, and one was that when something goes into the black hole, it gets very, very hot. Okay, and so you have this rising of temperature around the black hole, and that will incinerate anything before it even gets to the middle. But other theories said no, it just goes straight through, and you won't even notice until you hit the singularity. And so this was called a firewall paradox. Does something get destroyed? And the answer was, ironically, kind of lends to Atheism or paraconsistent logic. What happens is both happens. Both happens. The object going in to the outside observer gets annihilated, gets burned up. It goes into infrared and it goes away. But it doesn't actually ever go into the black hole. You never see anything fall into the black hole from the outside. It's only to the observer inside the black hole or going into the black hole where you're going to even notice it. And then to you, you survive just fine. You don't die. But to the outside observer, you die. You burn up. So you're both live and dead by going into a black hole in that regard. Yeah. And TomTom34, yes, you can join the conversation, but you got to be on Twitter to do it. I have a Twitter space. Just go to my page on Twitter, and I forgot to put in the link, didn't I? So I'm going to do that right now while Dan or John continues. So let me get the link to do
I'll
that.
give the floor to John. I've got some things to do, so might be back later.
Thank you,
Thanks.
sir. Yes, of course. And while you're doing that, I'll put the link in the video description because I totally forgot. Well, I'll just pin it to the I'll just pin it to the live chat. Pin. There we go. Come on in. Okay. So, anyways, John, where were we on epistemology? We got sidetracked into physics.
Well, sure. I'll summarize my original
Sure.
internal critique, and then I'll go to a second point, and then there's one more point after that, which will actually be a classical syllogism to try to actually make a positive argument for God. I know you said you don't need definitive proof. You'll subscribe on evidence and adopt belief. With that in mind,
well, hang on. Let me clarify. On empirical and observational evidence, I don't think you can actually use logic to prove God one way or another. And I write basic proof. So I wouldn't be convinced by a proof, by a logical proof, because there's the problems with that we'll get into. But go ahead, give me your shtick.
I'll attempt to do that later.
Yeah.
It uses a little bit of posteriori and a priori, but before we get that, my original internal critique was that to claim you're agnostic would acknowledge the existence of being, and in order to do that, you have to assume axioms, sort of like this Descartes, I think, therefore I am, and that's just an axiom which takes faith because it's unjustified belief. So that's my first argument. We've already talked about that. If you want to respond to that, you can. If not,
real quick,
I'll go on to my next point.
The problem with the Cogito was not what you said that there was a problem with. The problem with the Cogito was it was self-referential, that it did assume I. But other than that, there is something doing the thinking, right? Even with Descartes, there is something doing the thinking. When you're saying I exist, something is thinking. His mistake was assuming that it was I, right? That he was assuming a self-identity. But it is self-referential that something is doing the thinking.
Well, an ultimate skeptic would say, how do you know you're actually thinking?
Because it's self-evident. And see, this is why I don't get into radical skepticism, because that's a sophistry. Not you, obviously. But I mean, there are radical skeptics. That's just a form of sophistry. Just like presuppositional argumentation is sophistry.
Well, yeah, I would agree with you, but it's still a question. Let me rethink my second point, and then I'll get back to you.
All right, TomTom34. ¿Cómo está usted? You have to unmute, Tom. There we go. Hi.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, how are you, my friend?
Yeah, that's great. I'm actually trying to figure out how, because I hear you on speakers, I just want to hear you on my microphone. Okay. On the topics, there were some strange claims making, like how do you know that this extreme skepticism, like how do you know that you know something that you don't know something, like that's going into extreme skepticism that was mentioned before.
Yeah, it's radical skepticism. I mean, John would probably argue that the only way you can actually know something is if God exists, and God is that foundation. Therefore, without God, you cannot acquire knowledge, which I think is it's presuppositional argumentation, and possibly even diving into Reformed epistemology. From a Plantinga view, but I certainly don't think that you need God for knowledge, not by any stretch of imagination. We definitely can know what things a priori. He disagrees, but he thinks God can violate, his version of God can violate the laws of logic. Like he can make something A and not A at the same time. I don't know what that would mean though, and so his view of God is a very different view than most Christians I've dealt with.
And also, I wanted to say, probably you are not picking up a lot of beginners on the holographic principle. And now it is more simplified, but just imagine you have a six-sided die, and any point inside of the six-sided die, you can determine by making a what's it called?
shining a light through that six-sided die, it'll produce something inside of it.
Yeah, but it is at a 90 degree to any side of the die. And you have three dimensions. So you have an x, epsilon, and z axis.
You're talking about tensor.
And you can...
It's called a tensor matrix.
Yeah, and you can determine any point inside of the die by the three...
degrees of freedom.
By a value of the three
degrees of
dimensions.
freedom. Yeah, they're called degrees of freedom. Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's what I was trying to explain by the four walls and the top and bottom, right? There's six sides. So that surface area of that die, if you would shine a light through that die, if you had an encoding on that die of a hologram, then it's going to produce the hologram, the three-dimensional hologram inside that die.
Yeah, so that would have been my suggestion to to pick up more of the beginners about the holographic principle, so they can better understand it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way of putting it. I was getting there.
Yeah.
But anyways, John, did you think of your third point?
Well, sure. Do you believe in the metaphysical? Do you think there's more than the material?
Well, I believe in metaphysics. Absolutely, metaphysics exist. I mean, are you asking me about physicalism or metaphysics? Metaphysics exist. Metaphysics.
Reality. Do you believe reality is more than that which is physical?
Yeah, I believe in mind, but I believe mind is I believe consciousness is part of the physical. I tend to what's called property dualism. So yeah, we have consciousness, but I treat the consciousness as part of the physical realm, just like we do abstract concepts. Like the number 2. Does number 2 exist? Well, yes, I think the number 2 exists platonically in what's called the platonic realm or an abstract realm. And I do tend to more mathematical Platonism, although I'm not against nominalism. I can get switched back and forth if I need to. But I do think that if you read Quine's thesis, called Quine's indispensability thesis, that he argues pretty decently that in order to use math for science, we have to treat it as something that exists. So when you're looking at functions, when you're looking at sets, when you're looking at numbers, we treat them as they exist. And when somebody asks, well, where they exist in this platonic realm, so to speak. But that platonic realm, all of that is part of some kind of physical universe. So it's kind of complex. So when you're talking about physicalism, I'm not a physicalist, but I do think that the consciousness supervenes upon the physical, and that there's something called source physicalism, where you have the physical first, and from that the mental comes, rather than a source idealistic or idealism approach where you have mental first, in which case God would exist, and then he brought the physical from that. So I don't believe that, right? I believe that the physical realm existed, and then from the physical realm somehow the consciousness develops, or mind develops. Does that make sense?
Sure. So something like neurons or sensory data and the hippocampus create logic. Would you say that? And they create all of logic. Would you say?
No.
Would you agree or disagree?
Disagree. We don't create we create forms of logic to describe systems, but logic exists one way or another, just like the number 2 exists one way or another. Now we can make our own types of logic, right? We can all make our own types of mathematics, right? There are mathematics out there that don't use the same axioms as the reals, right? There's if I remember correctly, it's called well, it's field theory, but it's metric. What's the hell is the name of it? Basically, let's say you have like 4 numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can make a complete field out of that and have a number system just based on those 4 things, and that's a complete numeric system. But I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. It'll come to me. It's not. Man, what is that?
I'm almost done before anyone else wants to
go ahead.
interrupt.
It just bugs me when I can't think of a specific term. It's called Oh, come on, somebody! My live chat's smart. Help me out, live chat. When you talk about like neighborhoods on infinitesimals, you're talking about things that are so close. There's a name for that, and I cannot think of the name for it. And as soon as somebody says it, I'm gonna be like, "Oh, damn it! I should have known that," because it's right on the tip of my tongue. But for the math people out there, Tom may know.
No, I don't know.
No. I mean, no.
It's actually just enough that you have 2 numbers. You have a binary system. Basically, for any sort of logical system, you have to have A and not A. So you have to have one thing and one thing that is not the other thing, and then you have a logical system.
Yeah, well, those are called a complementary, right? Because in classical logic, A or not A is always true because it's a tautology. It's a
Yeah, but
negation.
how would you form a logical system if
Well, you
everything
could. It
is
wouldn't be very useful, but you could.
can?
You could. It just wouldn't be very useful.
Okay,
we're
maybe
categorizing
it would
things,
not
right?
would not be very useful. Okay.
Like in the act of categorizing things, you sort of create a sort of logic, right? You can say like I have two of certain thing, but that two-ness of those things only arises as I define those objects, right?
Yeah. Okay, that's great because that gets into universalism, universals and particularism, and universals and um, um, particular instances of things, right? So that's a great example of that, right? Two-ness, oneness, blueness. So when you have the color blue, there's a realm where blue exists, and then something as a property has an instantiation of that color blue. This was the whole thing with the problem of universals, right? But what is that? What am I thinking? This is going to drive me nuts. It has to do with measurement. It's measurement theory. But but there's a specific term in measurement theory where when you're talking about things that are so close together that they're almost the same thing. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna have to look it up. I'm gonna Google this because I'm just. But go ahead. And by the way, Brain Worm, how are you?
Hey, what's up?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, though.
Yeah, I like talking about the what is it? The futile task of categorizing things.
I don't think it's futile. I think we categorize things because it's our nature to try to put things in groups. And as long as we have a good way of doing that, I have no issue with that, right?
I just mean it like in a metaphysical sense, like it's futile because there's no really objective way to categorize anything. We just kind of intuitively understand certain categories as we define them.
Correct. Yes. I absolutely agree with that. But I also think we do have arbitrary categorizations for things based upon observations. I mean, even like humans. Right. Humans are, categorized as bipedal, chemoheterotropic, multicellular. But I mean, I've had that discussion with like Aaron Ra, who argues that is a metaphysical necessity, that humans must be multicellular. And he doesn't understand that's not metaphysically necessary, not by any stretch of imagination. It's that we've categorized humans to be based upon certain arbitrary attributes that we've decided will make a human. And he doesn't understand that at all, and it's so frustrating. Oh, it's gauge. I was thinking of gauge measurement, gauge theory. It's gauge theory. Okay, there you go. No, not Diddy-Kong cut, Hank. Diddy-Kong cut. A Diddy-Kong cut is a way of trying to make a number by a mathematical approach similar to a Cauchy sequence. So a Cauchy sequence is when you have a convergence of two sequences into one number, but a Dedekind cut is a very similar way of trying to make every single number out there, right? How do you make that number? But this is called gauge theory. But yeah, I never really learned Dedekind cuts that much. I did have to read about Cauchy sequences, but Dedekind just isn't really that popular in mathematics, I guess, because I never really had to learn it until much later on in life. I looked at it and I was like, not that interested. Maybe Brainworm, he knows math.
I wish I studied more math, honestly.
What was your field?
Biology and chemistry.
Oh, well, that's even harder.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Organic chemistry?
No, genetics.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I remember something about that on your timeline before. I think I've seen that.
Maybe.
Do you have that on your timeline?
I don't think so.
What am I thinking of? We should have it hang on genetics one of these days. Because I like talking about that topic too, especially on the DDX11L2 gene that Tompkins claims is a active gene on the human chromosome number 2. He claims that the pan-troglodyte 12 and 13 didn't actually fuse together because there's an active gene there. But here's the fun fact. He says he said, and I'm not even joking. He says that it's actively transcribed. It's a high transcription rate. But when everybody looked at the numbers, the transcription rates were very, very, very low, like 3.9 RPKM. which is just spurious spurious not translation. What
Transcription?
Yeah, transcription. Just spurious transcription. I'm telling you, I'm all over the place today, man. I'm like had way too much coffee. So please forgive me. But yeah, that transcription level was very, very low. So when people asked him, well, where are you getting these numbers from in your head that these are high levels of transcription when 3.9 RPKM is pretty low? And he never was able to explain where he pulled this out from, that he said it was highly expressed. Well, would you consider 3.9 RPKM to be highly expressed? Because I never met anybody that did.
Probably not.
Yeah. Anyways, John, back to you.
Yeah, I was asking, do you think sort of math and logic, do you think these things are to explain our reality itself, our material world, or do these concepts exist all throughout reality, if there is morality?
I think they exist independently. I think we discover them.
How could you know this?
No, you asked me what I think, not what I know.
Okay, I was just asking if you did know. Let's see here. So do you actually believe in the supernatural itself?
No.
But where else would these things exist absent material reality? Why don't you define that as the supernatural?
No, that's why we have a platonic or abstract realm that I talked about earlier.
Well, how is that different from the supernatural, meaning
Because it's
metaphysical?
Because it's conceptual. Matter of fact, where does where does the mind exist? Right? Descartes, as you mentioned earlier, believed that the mind existed in the pineal gland, but they call the seat of consciousness. But when we're talking about consciousness, I don't think it has any exact location. So we can't just say, oh, let's point to the number 2. It's an abstraction. So when we're talking about abstractions, we're talking about an abstract realm where these things exist. Doesn't mean it's an actual ontological place. It's just the way we convey things for meaning to talk about it when we say something like the number 2 exists. Because if we said number 2 doesn't exist, then we couldn't use it for anything, right? We couldn't use the number 2 if it doesn't exist. We have to be able to use it.
Would
because it
you
exists
agree
in some way.
Would you agree that we can only come to know logic and these sort of these mathematical laws and understanding of variables that apply to reality through sensory data? Do we have to understand them through sensory data?
No, I don't know.
So how can we
It's a
come to know them
posteriori.
absent sensory data?
A priori knowledge, which is by definition not sensory.
All right, give me an example that doesn't use sensory data.
All of x equals x is a priori knowledge. It's not a posteriori.
Could you say that again?
For all of x equals x. That is by definition a priori knowledge, not a posteriori knowledge. We don't have to have that by observation or experience. We can know that because it's true analytically.
Well, I would say that's only true because it is aligned with the parameters of our reality. All of x in the physical realm would equal x, correct? But what if there was a sort of supernatural dimension that doesn't follow these laws? But you would say they would have to because they
Yeah.
apply
Yeah, I don't
to
think
all
God could
realms of
even
reality. But
right.
I would just argue that. But okay, let me so. So
real quick, I'm gonna interrupt
do you see
Oh,
that?
hang on. I don't want to interrupt you real quick, but thank you, Purple Dragon Shill. How you been? It's been a while. So my moderator is she gives memberships every so often on my channel. So if you're interested in becoming a member of my channel, every so often, Autistic Shill, that's her nickname, we'll do that. So if you're watching me on YouTube, thank you, I appreciate it. Sorry, go ahead. I'm just like I said, I'm all over the place tonight.
I was going to make an argument for logic existing outside of the physical realm, but you seem to agree with that, but you seem to be turned off by the word supernatural. Why is that?
Because it's not above the natural. Nobody's ever argued that mathematical Platonism is supernatural. Nobody's ever argued that possible worlds are supernatural, right? When we talk about possible world semantics, are we talking about supernatural? No. We're talking about possible world semantics, and again, from a modal anti-realism point of view, because I'm a modal anti-realist, that when I say contingent means that it must exist in one possible world, I'm not arguing that possible world actually exists, right? It's conceptual. These are abstractions.
Well, would you say they exist subjectively or objectively?
I don't think that. I think it's a malformed question. I mean, neither or. It's, they exist in a conceptual realm. I mean, if you want to argue, I mean, like for example, if I say John's consciousness exists, I can objectively say your mind exists because you're speaking to me. That's not subjective. But to feel your mind, to be part of your mind, to say that John is experiencing something, that's subjective. So, Purple Dragon Shill gifted 5 memberships. Who's the big winner? Dan the Machine, member of the channel. Outside of the Cube, member of the channel. Skeptic77, member of the channel. X Forbidden One, gifted member of the channel. Steve, you didn't get one. And while you're listening, Steve, why are you over there in live chat? Get over here in the Twitter feed.
I am here.
Oh, wait, where? What? Oh, shit! When the hell did you get here? I didn't even see you. I saw you in the live chat. I didn't see you sneak in, you little bastard. Damn. Damn, that... Okay, sorry, my bad. But hey,
always gets the last laugh over the Lions.
You're freaky stealthy, dude.
Yeah, it's Halloween. It's the Halloweeny season, so I gotta be.
Well, glad you could make it. And thank you for gifting those memberships. I'm trying to do streams every week now. If you haven't noticed, every Friday and Saturday I will be streaming either Friday night or Saturday night. I'm doing the struggle sessions. Mary Kate Delvey couldn't make it tonight because she was visiting her family in Tampa after the hurricane. But she probably will be with us next week to do struggle session number 4. And Steve, you want me to tell you the name? Want me to tell you the name what the session is going to be?
Oh, I can't wait. What is it?
It's going balls deep. On transgenderism, going balls deep. Come on. That's good.
Yes.
That's good.
Oh, yes. I love it.
Because we're going balls deep, people. I don't mess around, man. You know what? I actually, for the first time, started enjoying streaming again once I realized that I don't give a flying F if I get canceled for the millionth time or not. What people think, I'm going to state my opinion. If they don't like it, don't listen. That's it.
Well, that's one of the
that.
things that's one of the things I've realized is once you can legitimately say, I just don't care anymore without actually having any hidden sort of like, yeah, well, maybe I'll care if this. No, when you actually don't care about the result, you're more than welcome to just go balls deep.
Yes. So we're going to go balls deep. So anyways, John, back to you. What else you got for me? By the way, you're arguing a lot of presuppositionalism, but which is fine. You're absolutely allowed to. But I don't think that any of my answers are incoherent or inconsistent or out of line with actual just basic philosophy. I don't think I'm pretty bland, to be honest with you, when it comes to philosophy. I pretty much take centrist approach on everything. I mean, I tend to moral realism, which most philosophers do. I tend to value pluralism. I tend to moral universalism. I tend to moral cognitivism. I mean, those are pretty bland approaches. Contextualism maybe sometimes, contractualism a little bit, but I don't even have any real radical views. I appreciate error theory even, but I'm not really like out there, I think, when it comes to a lot of my views.
Yeah, ride that bandwagon, Steve.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, Flame. I want to be one of the many, you know? I want to be like just the bandwagon dude, you know? No, I just think that the moderate centrist approach makes sense to me in a lot of these positions. You know, especially like moral realism, it makes sense to me. You know, value pluralism makes sense to me. So I take that approach in everything I do.
Yeah, moral realism makes no sense to me. The reason is because we don't all agree on the morals.
That has nothing to do with moral realism or not, though. That's irrelevant whether we agree or not. They don't need it. There doesn't need to be intersubjectivity for moral realism. That's the problem. You and a lot of people always seem to conflate moral realism with moral relativism, and they're not the same thing. Moral relativism is opposed to moral absolutism, which is two extremes with kind of moral universalism in the middle. But moral objectivism is antithetical to moral subjectivism. And so one is a meta-ethical theory on just whether propositions can be true or false and independently discovered. That's what really moral objectivity is. It doesn't matter whether people disagree with it any more than they disagree with 1 + 1 = 2. It's still objectively true that 1 + 1 = 2. But if Make Lying Great Again came in and said, hey, I'm a physicist, which he is, and said, oh, you know what, 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, well, then he'd just be wrong. from a mathematical point of view, right? Mathematical objectivism would be he's just wrong. Doesn't matter whether he agrees or not.
Well, unless you're using zero ring, then he could be right.
Well, if you're using a zeroth ring, then 1 equals 0, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But that's 1
So
equals 0. That's
context
not 1
dependent.
plus 1 equals 2. That's 1 equals 0 in a zeroth ring. And I'm surprised you actually knew that, because I didn't know you looked at anything when it comes to ring theory. But interesting.
Yeah, that means it's context dependent.
Yeah, but do you know why it's 1 equals 0 in ring theory?
Pretty much
Come on.
everything is zero.
No. Make line great again. Let's test your remembrance on ring theory here. Why in a zeroth ring is 1 equals 0? I'm going to put him on the spot. He's got a PhD in this stuff, so I'm going to be stupid compared to him. See if he remembers. Anybody?
No, he's a listener at the moment.
He can come up. I invited him. I invited him when he before. He doesn't remember. Steve, you want to take a stab? Okay.
Considering I'm not even studied in it, rephrase the question if you would, please.
In ring theory, which I have on my blog, a post by Dr. William Pye on this very subject, on the hierarchy of rings, fields, and groups, which again I have to occasionally go kind of look at because I don't deal with any of it. But there's something called the zeroth ring. And the zeroth ring is when 1 equals 0, when you have the additive identity, which is 0, equal to the multiplication identity, which is 1. So when you're talking about rings and fields, you very much get into identities. And since anything times 1 is itself, that's an identity. A times 1 is A. Anything plus 0 is itself. So A plus 0 is A. So the zeroth ring is when you have the additive identity for a field is equal to the multiplicative identity. And I may not be exactly on that because I haven't looked at it in a long time, but I think that's pretty well correct if anybody out there is an actual mathematician.
I just checked the Wikipedia page, so it's close enough.
And I swear to God, I'm not looking up anything on Wikipedia right now. The only thing I Googled was gauge theory. I was trying to figure out for the measurement theory, So
Okay.
I'm definitely not looking it up.
If 1 would equal 0, then that would mean 1 was at the multiplicative of 0 to equal 0.
It would mean that
in that case.
it would mean that the additive identity is equal to the multiplicative identity. That's what it means.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with it has not to do with reals, real analytics, right? In real analysis, when you look at an equality sign, you're actually looking at a equality between sets or functions. So when we say something has the equivalency, it's not the same thing, right? When we say 1 equals, when I say 1 plus 1 equals 2, what's on the right-hand side of 1 plus 1 is clearly something that looks different than 1. But what we're saying is the equality of what they point to on the real number line are the same value. But there are stronger forms of equality than equal sign. And that's when you get into what's called triple bar or by definition.
So an example of what you just said is how 0 degrees Celsius is the same as saying 32 degrees Fahrenheit.
Negative.
Same thing.
Positive 32 degrees Fahrenheit is 0 Celsius, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's a logical concept then. I'm getting it.
Yeah. Or when they equal each other, which is at negative 42 degrees? I don't remember. When does Fahrenheit and Celsius become the same number? It's negative something.
I don't think they ever do. I think
no, they do at one
Celsius
point. They cross
negative
paths.
40. Negative 40.
There you go. Thank you.
Negative 40.
Yeah.
Okay.
I knew it was somewhere in that ballpark of negative 40 something or other, but yeah.
And they have to. They have to. So.
Yeah, they have to, because if you look at the Rankine scale, which is based on absolute zero, then everything goes up from there, especially on the Celsius, because it's a damn metric system, which us Americans don't use because we're American.
Yeah. What do you mean 30 feet off the ground? That is 8.818 God-given American yards right off the ground.
Yes, yards, football. See, we don't measure football fields in meters, do we? We don't say 100-yard touchdown. We say 100 yards touchdown. We don't go, it's such and such meters. No, we don't. Nope. Sorry.
No, we have yards, inches. We
yards.
Have feet.
Exactly. I mean, seriously, can you imagine if some announcer was like, We have such and such just did a touchback. We run the ball back from a 91.44 meter touchdown. No, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen.
Nah.
It's 100 yards. Shut up.
Yeah, we got yards for that.
America. Oh, hey, by the way, while I got you here, Steve, just to let you know, and I'll let my audience know. So GeoStreber, a friend of mine who is a PhD in chemist, great guy. He's going to be doing a stream with me on election day, as I've done in past, where we go over the electoral college in real time as things come in. And I was very much correct last time. I was like, yep. This is the one time before it. This is electoral college. This is what's happening, because a lot of Americans don't understand how the electoral votes work. And so you're more than welcome to join us, Steve. In fact, it'd be great if you could, and anybody else.
If I could make it, I definitely would be down. As you know, politics are kind of my
that's
bread and butter as far as that one's concerned.
I don't know if you're going to be streaming something yourself, but if you decide not to,
no,
like
I usually do the streaming when it came down to the debates, not so much the electoral college.
Like, that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be looking at that map in real time.
Yep.
Because I said the first election when Florida fell, because Florida, and again it's been a while, but I think they had like 48 something electoral votes. I don't remember the exact number, 40, 50, whatever it was.
It was 48. It was 48 electoral.
Oh, sweet! See, damn, dude. All right, so 40 when that 48 went to Trump, it was game over after that. It was game over.
Yep.
And now that the swing states are starting to swing back a little bit because there was a little bump for Kamala. Now it's going back to Trump, but we'll have that. We'll have that just another hang up. But yeah.
Yeah, if I can make it, I definitely will. I definitely will make the effort.
Before we get too far, if we can, though, I really do want to dive into, because I had somebody asking me on Facebook and on Twitter about agnostic atheism, and I really do want to get into that if we can at some point. But I want John to finish first with his presuppositionalism. I like the fact he's trying to stump me. I do like that. I really do. But I don't think he's succeeded so far. No offense, John.
Yeah, sure. Well, you would think that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, of course. I know this. No, I believe this. I don't want to say no.
So does logic exist?
Which I've already established, yes.
So if it exists, you'd say it's a false dichotomy that exists objectively or subjectively. How would it exist then?
Well, no, I mean, I don't, again, because it depends on what you mean by existence. Some people look at logic and numbers with nominalism. Some people look at it Platonic realism. You know, it's a philosophical viewpoint. So you cannot say one or the other. It's literally your philosophical viewpoint. We can say, though, once you accept logic exists in some capacity, then it's objective of how you build the framework, right? I mean, the law of identity is objectively true no matter what you believe. That's objective. There's no no rational way you could deny the law of identity. You'd be irrational.
Well, I would say yes, because it describes the parameters of our material reality, but not to go from that to say it's always true absent reality. I think that's a big jump.
No, not necessarily. I mean, some people argue that reality must exist in some way, that there always must be something. I don't know if I go to that extreme, but one of these days I would love to make lying great again, and some other people to have a discussion. Like I was able to talk to Dr. Lawrence Krauss about Stephen Hart. Oh, hang on one sec. I got an incoming call. 1 sec.
Yep, it's an important call. It's a very important call.
Okay, sorry.
There we go.
I'm back. I'll give you co-host here in a second for those interruptions. But I was able to talk to Krauss about the no boundary proposal, and I think that it makes a lot of sense. If universes did exist prior to ours, it wouldn't have a boundary condition. We could go back to t=0 using imaginary time and model it that way. Doesn't mean that's the case, but I do think that there might be an argument to be made that there is a reality that exists at all times for some reason. Why? I have no idea. But if the no boundary proposal is the case, and there could have been universes prior to ours, it would just be an infinite amount of universe after universe after universe after universe. It's not the answer that people want to hear, because we have no understanding of why that would be. It would probably just be a brute fact at this point if that was the case. But I have come to the conclusion that man may not be able to apprehend the big truth about reality. We are limited by biological processes. We're limited by billions of years evolutionary, and so our minds just are not cut out to apprehend certain things.
We're also
So,
limited by culture.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm okay with that. I think that, and no disrespect to John because I don't put him in this category, but I think it is very human-centric as a theist to argue that we can somehow know the absolute basis of reality merely by positing a God. That doesn't get anywhere near what we would understand to be the truth. I mean, if God exists, that doesn't explain anything about why something does exist. Did he create it ex nihilo? What would it mean to exist outside space-time? There's a lot of factors that really play into what would even mean if something like heaven existed. And so I don't think positing a God explains anything. Why did God do this? Why did he create this actualized world as opposed to any other? And John argues that God could violate the laws of logic, which makes it even more complicated because I don't know how to even argue against that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
You understand your position is rare, right, John? You're not that's a rare, very rare position in Christian.
Now, I take
right?
that position too. I take that position as well.
Well, you're just weird, Hank. We know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you assume omnipotence, why wouldn't God be able to violate logic?
Okay, well, let me ask you: if God is omnipotent, and God is all able to do whatever, including violate logic, could God will himself to not exist?
Yes.
Okay, so if God willed himself to not exist, what would happen?
Well, you can construct it as like a timeline break. In one timeline, God wouldn't exist, and in a different one, God would exist.
John's going to lose his mind.
Context issue.
Yeah. Well, no, I understand that, but if God said to himself, "I am just tired of this," and I do not want to exist any longer, you're saying that God can do that?
Yes.
And would we exist if he vanished, or is it like a demerge or a theistic personalism that without his existence, all of existence would cease to be?
So pretty much you have to make a quadratic or something like that. So you can have a universe where God exists and we exist, a universe where God doesn't exist and we exist, a universe where God exists and we don't exist, and a universe where neither God nor us exists.
I have no idea what the hell you just said.
Yeah.
The way that Hank is, I understood what Hank was going for. So it's like it would be a split 4 ways. It would be like you have a sheet of paper and you drew a line down the middle vertical, a line down the middle horizontal. So you have the universe we're in right now, according to some. I should put that preface out there, where God and us exist. And then there's another universe where, according to some, in our universe, we exist, but God doesn't. And then the third quadrant would be where God exists, but we don't. And the fourth quadrant would be where none of us exists.
Those would be logical. Those would be the 4 logical cases, right? Because it's basically you have two things, right? So if you're looking at the informational states, to the end is basically 4. So you basically have, like you said, God exists and we exist. God does not exist. We don't exist. We exist. God doesn't exist, or God exists and we don't exist. Those are the only 4 logical event spaces, right?
Yeah.
I have a much simpler answer. I would just say that he can will himself to exist and not exist. He can violate the law of non-contradiction and identity. And how could he go about this? I would say our conceptions are limited. Our conceptions are human, and we're not all powerful. We're all omnipotent. So to try to conceptualize this,
it's still irrational, though. I mean, you agree though. If God's able to make X not equals X, it is logically incoherent.
I would say we can't conceptualize it, but I could say that's what all powerful means. It's sort of like
we can conceptualize it. We can conceptualize it in the fact that it's logically incoherent. We can apprehend it well enough to understand that something cannot be not itself.
Well, we
To
can't
say
imagine
something
it,
that
but
is-
that doesn't mean it's not possible.
To say something that is all possible is something that we made up, though.
I'm not sure I agree with that, because if it's logically impossible, it doesn't necessarily imply metaphysically impossible. There's a very nuanced discussion to be had with that. However, if it is logically impossible, then I don't think that a metaphysical being could change that. I don't.
I
know.
just demonstrate that it is logically possible if we just have just multiple universes or timelines where you go over the possibilities.
No, you're
Yeah.
talking about God not existing. I'm talking about violating identity, where something is and is not at the same time, right? That's identity. The law of identity states that anything is itself, and so you're saying that God could violate that, and even though we cannot conceptualize what that would mean, it's still a logical impossibility. By definition, is a logical impossibility. Whether it's metaphysically impossible, that's a different story. I would argue that it is metaphysically impossible, but it's not the same as saying logically impossible. It's logically impossible by definitions of logic.
I would say that the law of identity and the law of non-contradiction and all of laws of logic apply to they're parameters to describe our material world and sort of like our programming, materialist programming. So to apply them to God, that would be what is the assumption, I would say.
Okay.
And I would agree with John.
And what version of God do you believe in again? I forgot. I think you mentioned it before. But...
Well, I'm just arguing theism right now. I'm Christian, but I wanted to argue that right now in this conversation.
I don't think that's a standard Christianity.
Well, I disagree with you. I mean, we had this conversation before.
I know we
have. We had this conversation before. You propose the classical theism God, and that's not the God of the Bible. So
let me ask Steve here, because he talks to more theists than I do.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen a lot of Christians argue that God can violate identity?
I've heard Christians try to argue that with God's abilities, he could easily make himself not exist, but also have a sort of substitute in line, so that there will always be a God. So a lot of the arguments that I hear are arguing for the idea that if God didn't want to exist, he wouldn't just leave us without a God. There would be a God at every point possible.
What? He would leave us
without.
Okay, so he'd be like, you know what? I'm gonna make. So Bruce Almighty, is that what he would do?
Right. So what?
Bruce Almighty.
Let's say I'm God, right? I don't want to exist anymore, and so I think, okay, well, I can't leave them without a God. So here's what I'm going to do. Being all powerful as I am, I'm going to make another God and tell that God, I don't want to exist anymore. That God's going to make me not exist. And then he gets to go for as long as I did, infinitely, until he doesn't feel like existing anymore. And then he's going to do exactly what I just did.
Do you know what that reminds me of? There's actually a series that are similar to that. And I highly, highly recommend it. I'm not really big into fiction any longer, but in this case, I highly recommend these books on fiction. It's called The Incarnations of Immortality by Piers Anthony. And
that sounds like something up my alley.
It is so brilliant. You wouldn't like it? Are you kidding? The very first book is called On a Pale Horse, and it's about Thanatos, the death, and that basically death is a job, that somebody takes the job over and becomes death. And when they get fired or they get sick of it or they move on, they pass the job on to somebody else. But there always has to be somebody doing that job of death. That's the incarnation they become. And there's death, there's war, there's Gaia, there's Mars, which would be war. Then there's eventually there's even Satan and God in the endings of the books. And so I won't spoil it for you, but it's good. It's a good series.
Sounds good. Sounds real good.
Dude, I'm telling you, read On a Pale Horse by Piers Anthony, the first book on the Incarnations of Immortality. It literally is one of the best series I've ever read in my life. And you know me, man. I want to give you a recommendation.
Man, I'm writing it down right now, dude. Like,
I'm telling you, you will love it. It's brilliant.
Can you put it into the live chat or maybe in the description of your video?
Somebody can. If one might, it's called The Incarnations of Immortality.
Incarnations of Immortality. That's what I'm gonna.
He also wrote the Xanth.
Google it right now.
Familiar with that? Yeah. So the first book, like I said, is called On a Pale Horse, and it is so good. It's science fiction with a little bit of comedy, but it's really profound stuff. It's very lighthearted, but again, not any spoilers. But Death is actually like a good guy. I mean, he's just doing a job, and he's sick of people being pissed off at him, right? Because he's just doing
Cleanup guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I put it in a YouTube chat. So
There you go. Thank you. And then of
There we
course,
go.
Satan is my favorite character, of course, in that series. Satan is they call For the Love of Evil, which was my favorite book of that series. Was For the Love of Evil, and it talks about who becomes Satan and how he gets the job being Satan. And he made his even worse than death, right? Because everybody hates Satan, and he's like, "Man, I'm just doing a job. Stop it," kind of stuff. You know.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, so, like, when we were talking about timelines earlier, right?
You get this
So
one on that crew, Kronos.
Yeah, Kronos. Yeah, exactly. So, one question that I ask whenever someone brings up timelines is if you could, it's the classic question. If you could go back in time and kill Hitler, would you?
I could definitely tell you my opinion on that, but I'll let
my own opinion. I'll throw myself under the bus before you do, Steve. I would not, because as terrible as Hitler was, every action in the timeline is concurrent with every other action. There are things that happen in every timeline that need to happen in order to get to the point that we are now. If Hitler had died earlier, yeah, a lot of lives would be saved, a lot of good would happen, but you're waiting for the next crazy Hitler to show up in that timeline.
See, I got a different approach, and I'm not saying your approach is wrong, but I got a different approach. Going back in time wouldn't change anything, because if you killed baby Hitler, what he grew up to be would be a completely different person because it's a very different timeline. And so,
we'll fork the timeline. I agree with Steve.
Yeah, and so it would be a branching. It would be a whole different universe that you're in. It would have no effect on us. And so you would just be killing an innocent at that point.
Yeah, and why not go back to Genghis Khan?
Yeah, and so that's my view is that no, you wouldn't want to go back in time. And do I believe time travel is possible? I know you're going to get shit for this, but I don't actually. At least not. The only time travel is possible is on the Planck level, where you have in mathematical possibility of particles going back and forward in time on a Feynman diagram. But as far as you've seen that. But as far as like going actual backwards in time, I think it violates entropic laws. I think it violates too many things, and so I hate to say it, but I believe time travel is possible only one way, forward. We can go as far as we want forward, and we might. And one day, it's not too far off, we can have the technology to do that. It's not even that hard. We have the technology theoretically to go as far in the future as we want. Just can't go back. So it's a one-way trip.
May I ask the panel for an opinion about a thought experiment? If you say analogically, God is like a person who prepares a field and he plants tomatoes, something like that, and he says, "Well, I prepared the field, I planted the fruits, the field." And I'll never go back and look at it again. If you live in that kind of quote-unquote universe, how would you determine if God does exist? If he never looks back at it, he doesn't interact. You pray to God, but he doesn't respond. So would you say God doesn't exist? Or does
I would say you could use something along the lines of the Uber argument.
Because you have no possibility to determine. God could exist outside of your perception, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would this also be another way of asking if the tree fell in the forest, nobody was around it? Not just does it make a sound, does anybody know that it fell? If nobody's there to witness it.
Pretty much, thinking exists outside perception still. So
it really matters on how you define sound, right? And I look at it from a physics point of view. Sound is not the sense data. Sound is not our apprehension of what happened. Sound is the compaction and compactification and rarefaction of air. So when you have a transversal wave, that's sound. Whether we're able to hear that sound or not is irrelevant. Just like light exists as a wave, whether we are there to see the light or not, it still exists. So yes, I do think that when a tree falls, it does make a sound. And and that I believe in also what's called ontological persistence, which means that things do exist even though when you're not looking at them, which I think is a problem for theists because God has to make everything in the universe exist even though we're not looking on these planets that are billions of light years away. God has to take care of all that stuff, and why? What's the purpose? It seems like wasted. I mean, God's omnipotence, so it's not wasted resources, right? But why? Why would God make a planet billions of light years away that we'll never even know exist? Why does he
I don't
do
know.
this?
Why would the universe do it?
No, but we're talking from a Christian perspective, right? We're talking
Why
about
would the universe do it? It's a waste, right?
No, but the universe doesn't have intentionality. I don't believe the universe.
I would
is
say
intentional.
we're trying to conceptualize God's will, which is infinite again, and it's just not. It's just not something you could do with a finite
But
mind.
that's what people do, right? If God created mankind, He did so with the ability to try to apprehend and understand. That's all we're trying to do. And as biological creatures, I think that we try to. I think we're limited, as you would agree. We are limited in our understanding, but that doesn't mean we can't ask the questions, John. I mean, you've been asking me a lot of questions, and I've been answering.
Sure,
them.
absolutely.
So why would you think God would create something that is outside of our ability to ever even know exist? I mean, literally, we cannot know outside of a certain realm that they exist because we can never reach it. By the laws of the universe, we can never get there, right? It's just completely off limits to us. So why did God create something beyond the observable universe that theoretically exists, or do you?
Well, you
think that
assume
God
there's no
didn't?
other being.
Because he wanted to.
Well, that's not an answer, though. That's
I would say
arbitrary.
you assume
Why does the universe have things that we can't observe?
Hang on, I want John to answer that.
Well, why do you assume we're the only being?
Okay, that's good. That's a good retort. So do you think that God created other Earths like us with salvation on other planets, like on the 13.9 billion light years away at the very edge of existence? That for us, because past that we can't get there, right? Anything past that will always be outside of our limit because the universe is expanding, unless God decides to somehow make expansion stop and start contracting again, which doesn't look like the case. It doesn't look like a big bounce kind of stuff. It looks like it will just expand forever until heat death. But why would God do that unless you think there's planets like ours out there that He has other people like us, or just life?
I mean, you're asking me why. I mean, I would refer to my original point, but to give you a better answer that you probably want, I would say, that maybe there is more observable, or there is other being out there in the universe, and maybe there's even just maybe there's just a thought that these planets exist for something that we're just not conceiving right now in this conversation.
Okay.
Is there a personal Jesus for each of these worlds?
Let's see, a Messiah for each of these worlds.
There's
I'm
more
sorry?
than one. There's more than one prophet for this world, so sure, why not?
Well, why would that be relevant in an argument of atheism versus theism?
Well, I figured if there's a multiplicity of Jesuses around the universe, how are we? Does God save each and every one of them? Do we all have the same original sins that's mapped on?
Sure.
Well, if that's the case, because I'm thinking aloud that we say we all have the same original sin, so it's all deterministic in a way because it's just written as God's will, so nothing matters, I guess.
Guess not. Okay.
But even if he doesn't, what is it to you? He might give you a path to salvation and give to other people in a different galaxy a different path.
Yeah, it could be.
Well, no, that's bullshit. Because in that case, morality doesn't matter. Because if it's all written, I'm just gonna do anything, and it's just
or
as
life-
God's written it, so it
life is
doesn't
different
matter,
than
right?
humans. I mean, there could be non-human life that requires.
I
But
know,
again,
but
I think the whole salvation thing makes no sense. The system doesn't make sense to me.
I agree.
I
I'm a
used to be a
universalist.
theist, right? But I don't know. Christianity as a whole makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I'm a universalist, so I agree. It doesn't make
Yeah,
sense.
no, and I appreciate that. Matter of fact, if I was ever to be a theist again, which is not likely, obviously, universalism is the only position that even remotely would make sense.
I want to make a good faith argument for why I am theist now and no longer agnostic. I, I I would say that axioms being self-evident isn't enough for me. That just isn't a good enough answer. But also, a lot of people have they either grant these things like moral absolutism as axioms, or they believe in, moral subjectivism, relativism. But if we can't create purpose existentially. It would be subjective. It wouldn't be objective. So if you believe in things like love is more than the physical, morality is more than the physical, then oh shoot, where was I going? Oh, then in existentialism is true. Purpose is real. Calling is real. Then you can only do that. You can only justify that with a God. And
Well, no,
I do believe these
existentialism
things are
is,
true.
but existentialism is very much not required to have God to have value, right? That's the whole point of existentialism, is that we give our own lives purpose.
Yeah, but the assumption with existentialism is that when it comes to pragmatically how we incorporate it into society, people really think they have meaning. They think their free will actually provides objective meaning, but it lacks justification objectively.
I'm not following that. Can you expound?
Yeah.
Why would
So
that?
so there's no reason for an existentialist to be to value their free will and not be a nihilist.
Why? That makes no sense. That's the whole point of existentialism, to give it value. That's the reason why it came about as a movement.
Where's the value at? Where's the value at objectively?
Value to procreate, value to get back to society, value to love your family and take care of them.
Why do
provide for
those
them.
things matter?
Why don't they?
Has something to do with well-being, I think.
Yeah, it's called.
Well, you're the one making the
eudaimonia.
assertion. That's the burden of proof.
No. You're saying that it wouldn't matter to the existentialist. You have a burden of proof too. Everybody has a burden of proof.
Well, why not? Why would purpose matter? Is my question.
Because that's what it means to give something meaning, right? We attribute something to give meaning. That is how we go about doing it. There's nothing wrong with that. What gives value to art? The rarity of it? Not necessarily. It's the appreciative of the aesthetics, right? So in aesthetics, the study of aesthetics, something is valuable because we appreciate the art. It gives it value, right? There's no inherent value of an art piece in any real sense unless it's made out, well, even then, made out of precious metal, then it has some intrinsic value. But if you look at a Van Gogh, there's no intrinsic value of the canvas that it's on or the paint. What gives his value is the painter that painted it and the way he painted it and the fame of that painter, right? That's what gives it value. We give it value in part. There's nothing wrong with that. We've
Yeah,
been doing
sure.
that in
I
society
agree.
forever.
We give it value, but what if someone is a rational person and they're asking for where is the value objectively, and they don't give it. They don't have this sort of irrational.
There's nothing with
or
rational. Why is it
All right, sure.
irrational?
I won't use the word irrational. I'll just say, let's say they don't have this aesthetical eye, and they're looking for the value in it. They would just have to submit to, maybe nihilism's true, and then they're gonna. And this is why a lot of Western countries have high suicide rates and things like these.
Why? That doesn't even
I
remotely
don't think that
follow.
follows.
Yeah, that doesn't even remotely follow. I'm gonna let Brain take that one because I know where I would go with this, but he said at the same time I did that we both agree that does not follow. But I want to hear his reasoning.
I was just gonna say,
Well-
there might be a song that exists, and it might mean something to me. It might not mean something to you. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have objective meaning. It does have objective meaning. It's just that it means something different to other people. Like, it's just our lived experiences and things like that, right?
Yeah, and also paintings. We can still say there's an objective value to it because we can look and say how much is this value worth. Well,
it would
objectively,
be-
we can both discover this painting is valued at $10,000. Do we think it's worth that much to pay for that? No. But
Because
that's-
on the flip side, how does a piece of art have any value within the Christian framework?
God.
No, well, I could say that, but I'm not arguing Christian epistemology right now. I'm just arguing for
Or
that,
just
that, that
or
would be
any.
that would be subjective value, though. It'd be value
So what?
given in
So
your
what?
opinion rather than subjective.
That's still axiology, right? I mean, money has no real value. A dollar bill has no value, right? It's debt
Mm.
money. It's fiat money. There's no intrinsic value in a dollar. It's all debt currency, but we give it value, and that's part of axiology. And even from aesthetics, we give it value. What gives Christian art value is the fact that it's aesthetically pleasing and people are willing to pay for that. That's an
Well, I
objective
would agree.
fact that people are willing to pay for it.
And also, I'd like to.
What if someone doesn't
pose-
value money? What would you say is the objective value
I
without
would
referring to
ask them for it.
materialism?
I would ask them for all of it then. If they didn't value it, then I'd be like, can I have it?
Okay.
I mean,
I'd like to pose that there's nothing about market value of a particular thing that's intrinsically relating to religiosity, because that's market. You're gonna pay for shit art from the 18th century because it's rare. That's markets. That has nothing to do with religion or anything. I think that's an unsecreted to
Okay,
figure out
so
that a
let's say
particular piece of art is worth something. That I'm gonna trade hundreds of thousands of dollars for
Well,
a piece of archaeological finding. But that doesn't mean anything. That's still just a piece of stone.
But that's how we
Doesn't mean
attribute, right? I mean, like my favorite art pieces, like one of my favorite art pieces in the world is probably something that most people probably never heard of. It's called "Can't Help Myself." It was in the Guggenheim. Okay, it was Jan and you or something like that. But basically, this art piece was this kinetic art piece of an arm, a robotic arm, that was leaking hydraulic fluid. That was the color blood, and it would scoop it up. And when it first started, it was not leaking that much, but it would just basically being, an arm that would keep people entertained. But as over time, more and more hydraulic fluid was leaking out of it, and it would have to scoop up all this hydraulic fluid in order to keep going. And it was very symbolic, very profound about how we live our lives, giving blood and sweat and tears just to survive. But in the end, we still die, and it did die. It basically didn't die, but in 2019, I think it was. This exhibit ended, and even though they did power it off every night, but it was very, very moving to me. I really thought that Can't Help Myself was one of the most profound pieces of art that I've ever seen, because it made me feel something, right? It had affected me. If I had valued that and I had the money and it was up for sale, then I could see why people would want to buy that, right? Because it produced something about a feeling in them that they liked. There's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean it doesn't have value.
If someone thought, how would you argue this thought? Someone looks at it, they think that it's a painting made out of atoms, and I'm just made out of atoms on a planet in a vast universe. Where in this vast universe can I discover the value of it, absent my personal biases? What would you say to that? You would say you. Well, what if they don't value it?
Well, then I feel sorry for them.
Well,
but there's also ways that people value things. So, like, I would challenge you that let's say that a ancient piece was being auctioned off, right? I would be willing to bet that everyone in that audience betting on that piece, and then this piece is Christian. Let's put that label on it. It is a statue of the Mother of Christ, Mary. I'm willing to bet money that anyone who's Christian is going to bet more than anyone who's an atheist, because the atheists would see the historical value in it, but they would not be as inclined because they like the religious aspect of it. The people who were Christian would not only see the historical, they would also see the references in their religion to it. So therefore, the Christians would see that as more valuable than the atheists would.
Yeah, I'm just making the distinction between the essence of something, meaning like something has objective purpose, versus existentialism, meaning that free will gives it its purpose. But the distinguishing factor is that one's objective and one's not.
I don't think it matters. I mean, what? Okay, like for example, you talk about you just being atoms, right? Yes, you're a collection of atoms, and in a mereological nihilism, that's all you are. You're a bunch of primitives that put together and forming some kind of collective being. And the same with a piece of art. An art is just a collection of primitives, atoms, right? On a dot matrix printer, if you remember those before your time probably, an image was made by little dots. Those dots were just dots, but when you put them all together, you got an image out of it that gave some value to it.
Well, what about collective value? You know, there's collective value in things like we live in a society, right? Or at least I assume that we all do. And since these societies have laws that like say, okay, well, if you just believe that nothing matters and you're a nihilist or whatever, and you want to go out and kill people and do things, you're going to be punished for that because of the values of the society that you live in. If you choose to live in that society, you choose to live by that social contract, and so there's sort of like an implicit value statement being made between you and the society that you live in.
100%. That's called collectivism and contractualism. Scallion wrote a book on that I couldn't get into because it was so profoundly deep beyond my level. But he wrote a book called "What We Owe Each Other." But yeah, Brandon's exactly right. I mean, John, if everybody thought like you for some reason that we're just should default to nihilism, how would we have a functional society?
No, I'm saying agnostic on purpose.
Well, I told
There's
you,
no reason not to think
no,
nihilism
agnostic
could be true.
No. I told you though, agnostic just means you don't have no position one way or another. That's all. I don't believe P. I don't believe not P. That's all agnostic.
Sure,
means.
yeah. I don't think purpose is necessarily objective or subjective. You could be agnostic on the issue.
Do you believe you have a purpose?
Well, I would because I'm coming from a theist worldview, but I'm just saying there's no reason to add value.
What's your purpose? Even if, let me ask you two questions. What's your purpose if Christianity is true, and what's your purpose if Christianity is false?
My purpose would be the purpose that is bestowed on me by God.
That's not an answer.
Well, you're asking me to argue from a Christian point of view. I'm arguing from a theist worldview.
Right. What's his purpose? Just to I mean, you could answer, well, God made me as just to worship Him for eternity. That would be a purpose. But saying God made me is not a purpose.
Basically, he did answer your question. If God doesn't exist, he does not have a purpose.
Oh well, yeah, no. But I asked him, from the.
Well, do I have to know my
exists?
purpose to know it exists?
No, but if God exists, you have no idea what your purpose is. Do you have
God exists, I have no idea what my purpose is. Yeah. I can know I have a purpose without knowing what that purpose is. 100%.
No, not well. How could you know you have a purpose if you have no idea what that purpose is? You're just saying
let me give you an example.
Purpose, but I don't know what that purpose is. Seems
let me give you an example.
Just interjecting quickly. You said your purpose is given by God. If God does not exist, that would mean you have no purpose. Is
100%.
that correct?
Yes.
But he could also believe that God existed, and in which, like, I heard you say it again, like.
But that's not what he said.
But I'm
addressing him specifically.
Okay.
Do you want to ask me, Steve?
Go for it. Yeah. What's your purpose?
Yeah. If I'm an atheist, which I am, big atheist here, just to make sure that I get the most of my living experience and just make sure everybody around me gets the same. So, and if God exists, it doesn't change the thing. Same thing.
It shouldn't change anything, right? I mean, again, I think John would recognize that if everybody thought that life has no purpose, no utility, and everything's nihilism, then we wouldn't have a functional society, and that wouldn't be a beneficial belief, even evolutionary wise, as Brain would probably argue, because he's a biology dude, that would not benefit society. Evolutionary wise, if society said, hey, you know what, we're just going to all, just let ourselves end. No, there's a perpetuation of the species because of billions of years of evolutionary biology. That's ingrained in us. That's hardwired into us.
Yeah, it's there because it isn't there. It's logical, right? If it wasn't there, then we wouldn't be here. But because it's there, we are here.
Yeah. I think there's some truth to that. I mean, I just think that, if and John, I'm not speaking about him specifically, but there are Christians out there that I've met that have argued that if they did find out for a fact there was no God, they would be out there doing whatever they wanted. And those people scare me because the only thing that's keeping them from being immoral people is the fear of God. That's not morality. That's fear. That's not being an ethical person.
Well, what happens when those people don't have God then?
we hope they believe forever is what they hope. What we hope.
I think it's. I
And
don't think it's really
honestly, I'm tired of that framing of the existence, because the fucking golden rule is something that is pushed around by Christians, and that's basically what every atheist applies. Is just being treated as you'd like to be treated, and just expanding that to outwardly, and that just to the lack of oversight of how somebody would act if they would have the Christian guidelines, that otherwise it would be utter chaos. I think it's so fucking reductive of how we should expect for human being to behave without the almighty guidelines of God. That's preposterous. That's infantilizing. It's stupid.
Well, that's where Christianity came from in some ways, right? Because Kant has argued, Kant argued about what's called the categorical imperative, right? What you would have said would have been, the golden rule. These were universal principles that he believed existed, and I think he's absolutely was right on that. And I think that because there's universal principles and categorical or even hypothetical imperatives, that man has tried to figure out a way to incorporate those in a way that he can make sense of them. And I think religion had come from that, wanting to make sense of that. Although you don't need it to be a good person. You don't need it to have the golden rule.
Yeah, and I think most, if not all, religions agreed with about 90% of all those basic rules anyway, and even atheists agrees with all of that. That just then to say that Christianity or Islam has the correct rule set, that's bunkers, because most of it just spread around.
Yeah,
everybody, we all agree about 90% on everything. So that's yeah.
Yep.
I just don't get the immorality of just disagreeing with your particular worldview. That's just
Well, I would say you can't have moral absolutism absent God, but you don't think secular societies have more issues in terms of being antithetical to civilization?
no.
Are you a moral absolutist, John?
Yeah, and I would
Really?
ground that in God.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
I think moral absolutism, yeah, because I mean, I'm not a moral relativist, but I'm not a moral absolutist either, because I think moral universalism is a nice, happy medium between those two. So you're going to argue. So you would argue. See, it's hard for me to understand how a Christian could even argue moral absolutism, because God has changed His view of morality by changing the laws over time. Like, it was immoral to eat shellfish and have mixed fabrics at one time, but not immoral now. You cannot have that with moral absolutism. Moral absolutism would be that these things are immoral forever and ever and ever, and they are not changeable. So how would God change those things if you're arguing moral absolutism?
Could you explain the differences, the nuances, please, Steve?
Yeah, okay, so we're diving into moral theory now. Moral relativism is basically the approach that things are not necessarily wrong as compared to the historical context or the culture in which a moral fact is known. For example, I think we all agree slavery is wrong. To a moral relativist, they can say, well, those people were not really held accountable because during the time period, slavery was condoned. So relative to that time period or relative to a culture, wasn't immoral for them to own slaves. For somebody like myself, which is a moral universalist, who always would argue that slavery is immoral across time and across historical context, I would argue that they were immoral, they just weren't aware of it. They didn't have the epistemological knowledge of slavery being wrong. But that doesn't change the fact that the morally stance that slavery was wrong. They just weren't aware of it. And the moral absolutists would argue that there are moral facts that are always wrong, always, regardless. The moral universalist takes a more liberal approach that there are some things that are always immoral, but it's not as an absolute as moral absolutists would take. It's kind of the middle ground position. Good, John.
How would you justify? So universalism is objectivism. You would agree?
No. Moral objectivism is contrary to moral subjectivism. Those are meta-ethical theories.
Yeah, but you said you're universalist.
I believe in morals. There are moral facts that are true and false regardless of culture or history. That's not moral objectivism. Moral objectivism is that there are moral facts that exist that are objective that can be discovered by people.
Well, what's the difference between objectivity
It's
and
a very,
truth?
very nuanced thing between meta-ethics and normative ethics. Very, very nuanced discussion, because the problem when you get into moral theory is that the terms subjective and objective mean different things to different authors in the literature, and it can be very confusing very quickly. So I just take a very simplistic approach in my moral epistemology. So when I'm talking about subjective, that just means that I cannot experience your qualia. And when I say objective, that means that we can discover something independently of each other. For example, if you have pain, John, that pain is subjective of that you are the only one that can experience it. I cannot experience your pain. It is epistemically isolated from us. But I determine that you're in pain. That is objective, because I can put a meter up to your brain and see that there's brain waves and states that we know we recognize as somebody would be in pain. So it's an objective fact that you're in pain, especially to the individual, because if you're in pain, it's called an incorrigible belief. You're in pain, but I can't experience it. So that's the same thing by a moral fact. A moral fact is something that a subjectivist and a moral objectivist would both agree is a moral fact, but the moral objectivist would argue that it's discoverable independently of anybody's opinion or minds that exist. While the moral absolutist would say these moral facts do exist, and they're always true and always false.
Well,
There's a subtle difference when we're talking about propositional evaluations when we're talking about moral theory.
yeah, I would say it's a little bit of obfuscation. In order for them to be true, they have to exist independently of the individual.
No, they don't. No, they
How
don't.
would you justify that?
If I said John is smart, no offense, but I'm just picking. Is John is smart? That's a subjective evaluation, right? There's no objective fact of the matter unless you want to go, okay, I'm gonna quantize this and quantify it by saying, well, if you're over a certain IQ, we're gonna call that smart. Okay, then you're gonna make it an objective framework for that, right? But your pain, your qualia that you have for your sense data is yours and yours alone. So if you say, John, I believe in God, I have to assume that's true, right? There's no way for me to verify objectively that you believe in God other than my evaluation based upon your performance. If you go to church and do all this stuff, I can say, yeah, I evaluate my subjective opinion that he believes in God, but I cannot objectively state that you believe in God, because I cannot get into your head and know that objectively. But we use these terms independently. Because I can say, well, I'm objective and I'm not biased, and I can see that John goes to church. I can see that John, has a bunch of religious iconography. So, what's your reason why you believe John believes in God? Well, I'm objectively looking at it and say he believes in God. But in philosophy, that term objective doesn't really mean that. It's a little bit new. It's so nuanced, though, because it doesn't mean without bias. It means that I cannot get into your head and experience that belief. That's what that means. See the difference? Only you can.
So you're saying objectivity. You're not an objectivist because it lacks the epistemic knowing, which is separated by essences.
Sort of. I mean, I do tend to moral objectivism, though. I believe there are moral facts that exist that are true and false, independently of anybody's existence. If nobody existed, there'd still be moral facts.
Oh, sure. How would you justify that then?
Because of moral ontology and moral epistemology. I would justify it by moral theory.
Elaborate.
I literally would just, I don't know what you mean by elaborate. There's moral theories out there that you can study moral theory, and that's how you justify things. Because there's moral theories out there.
Are you a consequentialist, a utilitarian?
No, neither. Although I see why people can
rule
appeal to
utilitarian, deontologist.
I'm not a deontologist. I'm not an act or rule utilitarian, although these things are things that people can appeal to. But I tend to value what's called value pluralism, where things are still wrong, but sometimes we have to take the lesser of two evils. For example, I would argue before that. Let's say I made a promise to take my daughter to Disneyland, right? So I have a duty, a deontological duty to my daughter, right, to take her to Disneyland because I made a promise, and this is called a commissive, a promise. But at the same token, let's say I had to work that time. The boss called me in, and I had to go to work, and I just had to break that promise to my daughter. If not, I'd be fired, and we would not be able to go to Disneyland or anywhere else. So breaking a promise, I believe, is immoral. Okay, it's unethical to break a promise. That's why people have known I've got screwed over a lot because I did a lot of things by handshakes, which we won't get into. But I believe to break a promise is immoral. But I also have a duty and commitment to the job, right? And this is obviously very hypothetical. This never happened. But value pluralism would say that both acts would be immoral. But the ethical decision is to take the one of the lesser of two evils, which is to go to work and then, take my daughter to Disneyland another day. So the ethical thing to do is still unethical, but it's the lesser of two evils. It's called, again, value or ethical pluralism.
And why is ethical pluralism wrong? Or right, excuse me, right.
Well, it's not a matter of being right or wrong. That's the philosophy that I subscribe to. There's no right or wrong to it. It's
right. So you're saying it's an axiom to you?
No, I don't take it axiomatically. I take it after reading a lot about moral theory over the years. That's the position that I landed upon as being the most reasonable.
Okay, let's get specific. What is objectively wrong?
Slavery.
Why is slavery objectively wrong?
Because it violates the.
What about slavery?
It violates the autonomy of a person, which goes against the grounding of eudaimonia that I use for my hypothetical imperatives. Like I said, John, here's the thing. You can ask all these questions, but if you
know where I'm going with this.
No, I don't. I have no idea. But I think that I think that you should probably formulate your own moral theory, because I could ask you what your moral theory is, and I don't think you'd have an idea, because your moral theory, you've basically just said God exists. That's my moral theory. That's not a moral theory. That doesn't tell you how to act in a ethical quandary. That doesn't tell you anything about normative ethics. What would Jesus do is only a slogan. There's no moral theory out there called "What would Jesus do?" Okay, so how do you determine your normative ethics if you have two decisions? How would you go about determining which is right or wrong?
Well, I think you're kind of shifting the question on me because you couldn't justify your.
I literally just justified it.
Ethics.
No, don't say that. I just justified it. I literally justified it by explaining it by rationality. That's what justification means.
Well,
like, John, let me ask you something. Hang on,
with-
John, let me ask you something.
Sure,
What do you think justification means? You use that term so many times, but I don't know if you really know what justification even means. What does it mean to justify something?
When saying justifying morality, I would say what metric would you appeal to specific to meta-ethics?
Well, you could appeal to something without justifying. I could have a belief that's not even justified, and I just appeal to brute fact. That's not justifiable. What does it mean to justify something? Like to justify a belief, to justify a moral theory. When you say to justify, what is it you're asking? Because you're talking about a metaphysical
Prove it to
concept.
be true.
No,
objectively.
That's not what to justify means at all. Nowhere ever.
That's the essence of what I'm using it for.
Why would you?
Why is that?
But why would you use the term so atypically? Because I've never seen the term used like that. You're not even in the realm of having the same discussion if that's a stipulative usage of terms that I've never even heard of before.
Well, I mean, this is a pretty common meta-ethical problem for non-theists. They have to justify the morality objectively. Why is your metric? Why is ethical pluralism
you're using
superior
the term
to
to define the term here. I asked you what does justification means, and you're using some atypical uses that I've never heard before, even from Christianity. I've read nowhere where justification means to prove anything ever.
I did.
I'll be more specific. To prove it true.
That's
how can you prove your morality true?
That's just restating That's just restating the question. What does justification have to do with proving your morality true? What does that even mean? True morality is not truth apt. Morality is a very complicated subject.
So you're saying it lacks truth value.
I think it's not.
So it's not true. So it's not
true
to say slavery is wrong. Is it true to say slavery is wrong?
Do you know that? Yes. You've asked me that question about moral objectivism, and I said slavery, which means that it is slavery, the proposition is slavery wrong, yes, that's true. It's truth apt. Do you know what a moral cognitivist is?
Moral cognitivist. I've heard of it. I forgot. Elaborate.
Okay, a moral cognitivist is a position that moral facts exist and they are truth or false. A moral non-cognitivist holds that moral truths are non-propositional, such as prescriptivism. Prescriptivism is the view on morality that when you're saying something like slavery is wrong, what we're really saying is don't have slaves. It's prescribing an action. Or in emotivism, it's more of a feeling. Boo slavery. And then if slavery is good, which is obviously
right.
it'd be yeah, it's called booyah. So that's emotivism. Those are non-cognitive views. So I'm a moral cognitivist. I believe that propositions, when it comes to morality, are true and false. When you ask me if slavery is wrong, I can answer that propositionally and say that proposition, slavery is wrong, is true. Because I'm a moral cognitivist. So
well, I would say why it's true, and you would ground it in something like an infinite series of metrics. You would say it's wrong because it's violating autonomy. Why is it violating self-autonomy? This principle, like John Locke principles.
But that's natural law
why is that
theory,
wrong?
Right?
Well,
because it's natural law. John
Well, it goes back to the golden rule.
And Dewey's pragmatism. Oh my God, I can't talk today. Brain, go ahead.
It goes back to the golden rule, right? Like, would you want to live in a society where murder was legal, where rape was legal, where sort of intuitively bad things are legal? I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to do that.
Right.
Because I'll explain the logic. Sorry, because it's like, so if I live in a society which believes that slavery is legal, then I have to be open to the possibility that I could be a slave, and I don't want that to happen to me, right?
Self-interest.
Exactly. It's the golden rule. It's just re-amplified.
Yeah, but that doesn't prove it has truth value.
That you're not understanding.
No,
you're not
proves,
understanding that.
proves that I have value for my life, right? And that other people have value for their life.
Right. See, what I think, John, is what's happening is that you're focusing too much on presuppositional argumentation without actually learning about moral theory like everybody else. And that presents a problem because when you're using terms like justification, you're using them so atypically where it's actually nonsensical. When especially when we're asking for things like metaphysical justifications, a lot of Christians and even atheists, I mean, it's not just Christians, atheists, they don't know what is asked for a metaphysical justification or grounding. Like if I told you that a metaphysical grounding is a non-causal explanation for an observation, for most people don't even know what that means, right? But that's what a metaphysical grounding would be, is a non-causal explanation rather than an explanatory causation for causality of chains of events, which you talked about, this infinite regression. That's not what a metaphysical justification even means. It's non-causal. That's what we're asking for. So God is not a metaphysical justification for anything, in my opinion. But when you were asking for causation, have you ever looked at Aristotle? There's many different types of versions of causality. He has what's called the four causes. Have you looked at that? They have the material cause, the formal cause, the efficient cause. These are all different types of causation. So it's not just, well, what's the cause of this? Well, you have to be a little bit more specific,
And without just I want to clear out something, because even if we don't seek to understand the causal foundation of the morality, we can go to the effect. If whatever action causes a better social cohesion, isn't it still a good justification to adopt certain moral actions within society, and however we want to enforce them? It doesn't need to come from an original outward going source, because if we measure the effects, it's just can leads to better results, and that
Look,
in itself it's a good reason just to adopt them.
Conventionalism is, but I'm saying, like, where's the truth value in that? You're saying, like, truth. I have
Does
a
it need
close
to have
idea
one?
of
Well, yeah,
truth.
exactly.
I'm
Why
like,
does it
well,
need it, John? Look,
let's clarify let's clarify the semantical difference. Then, what would you define truth? Well, fine. Go ahead and ask me your question.
well, let me ask you this: if your goal, and we'll go to a hypothetical, what's called a hypothetical imperative, not a categorical imperative, but a hypothetical imperative. If your goal is for society to continue, is it not objectively true that if you killed every single child that ever is created until every single one, so there's no birth rate is now 0, is it an objective fact that that society will die out?
If you killed all the children,
Yes.
yes, it is objectively true that
Okay,
that
so there's
society
an
will die out
objective
if you
fact
don't
of the matter to
repopulate.
be had, right? No matter what your belief is, there's an objective fact of the matter to be had there. So it is immoral to kill every single child because an objective fact of the matter violates the grounding for that hypothetical imperative.
No, the syllogism doesn't follow because you're grounding in morality and
No.
you're saying
You're
morality.
Nope, you're grounding in harms and benefits, which is called eudaimonia. That's the most common. That's how more. Why do you think we even have morality in the first place? As Brainware noted, we have morality to get along in society. That's why man has morality. Is to get along so we don't end up killing each other.
I think it's a little bit more fundamental than that. Like we were talking about evolution, and I think what we really need to talk about in this conversation is the evolution of memes or the evolution of ideas, right? Like there are certain societies that didn't have the same values. Not every society has the same values, obviously. Certain societies will thrive and certain societies will not thrive depending on the values of the individuals in that society. And over time, the societies that had the values that allowed the society to thrive.
I'm sorry. I'm well aware of all this.
That's called the selfish gene. That he's talking about, John. The selfish gene literally
I'm well
is
aware
about
of all
that.
this. I understand. Some you could say values are more pro survival or more pro civilization flourishing than others. I'm just asking, like, we can get past this. Come on, we're all. I mean, this is in the realm of philosophy. I'm asking where the truth value is.
That is philosophy.
And you're saying it, right. And you're saying that it's true that there can be bad effects. And I'm saying, well, why are you asserting that the effects are bad? And you're saying, well, you're kind of obfuscating at that point. But
no, they violate the grounding. This is why we have the grounding. The grounding is a non-causal relationship. This is why we have a grounding. This is part of what's originally called the grounding problem. But again, when you start to talk about truth, do you know there's different theories of truth? There's not just one theory of truth. You know that, right? What
right,
it means
but
to be true.
The law,
do you
the law of non-contradiction concludes that there's only one thing that is true.
No. Theories of truth. For example, have you ever heard of the correspondence theory of truth? Have you ever heard of deflationary theory of truth?
No,
Pragmatic
I've not
theory
heard
of
these
truth.
different theories
Semantic
of truth.
theory of truth. These are all different forms of theories of truth.
If they make different claims, only one can be right, or none of them.
We have to understand what it means to be true, and man has to say, okay, when we say true, what does this word denote? What is it denoting to the listener? And so these theories of truth tell people in philosophy what that word means, depending on the theory of truth that you subscribe to, because there are some differences in those theories of truth. Some of which have what's called a truth maker, like the correspondence theory of truth says truth is what comports with reality, as Arn Robb always loves to say, and he happens to be right on that particular issue. But there has to be a truth maker, something that exists that makes that statement true. Then we can say that is true. The canonical explanation or canonical analogy is the cat is on the mat. You always hear that. So what makes it a true that the proposition the cat is on the mat is that you can look, and there's something called direct causal theory of truth, and I can say there's a direct causal relationship between what I'm observing and the existence that I can say it is true that the cat is on the mat. It corresponds with reality. That's when we meet that sufficient justification, then we can say it's true. It doesn't have anything to do with absolutism. Somebody could argue, well, it could be an illusion. Okay, sure, whatever, irrelevant. All we have to do is meet the justification is there something ontologically that we can observe in order to say that it's true? That's what the corresponding theories of truth is.
Quick clarification question to you, Steve. These are all different approaches, epistemological approaches to get to the ontology that is the truth.
Yeah, or even more how we frame our epistemology, right? Because our beliefs are predicated upon that semantic content. If I say the cat is on the mat, and I say I affirm that semantic context, then that means I believe that the proposition is true. And why do you believe it's true? Well, I'm looking at a cat. That's justified. That's all there is to it, John. If I'm looking at a cat in direct causal theory or correspondence theory, and I see a cat on the mat, and you ask me, hey, Steve, do you believe there's a cat on the mat? And I say yes, and you ask me, why do you believe there's a cat on the mat? Why do you justify it? I'm like, because I'm staring at the cat. Boom. That's all there is to it. There doesn't need to be anything more than that.
I mean, that's the whole premise behind Schrodinger's cat, anyways, right?
Yeah, yeah, but he actually used that to actually try to show how weird quantum mechanics is, but there was never actually. He never really meant for it to be a cat, live or dead. That was people took that and ran with Schrodinger's cat. The cat is not alive and dead at the same time. That's kind of a misunderstanding of quantum mechanics. It's an unknown. It's in superposition where it's not determinate of what position it's actually in. But to say that the cat is both alive and dead is really not true. But go ahead.
But Steve, just to put a caveat on that, where as a secular proponent, the fact that if it matters or not, what I'm worried about, if do we have to murder infidels? That's where I get whether the ontological aspect of it matters or not. I think where we take this this ontological truth of where we get morality or where we get our what should be our moral guidelines, there's a lot of really abhorrent sort of way to lead your life, and murder infidels is a bit extreme, but what do we think about homosexuality? What do we think? How we frame our moral guidelines, whether or not the ontology is true or not? I think that's a bit more important than just figuring out for the fun of it what is true or not.
I got you, man.
Sociological
One second,
implications.
Because I want to ask John this. I got you, Dan, because this is how I view it too. Look, if God came down and said, "Hey, I want you to kill in my name," it would. If I did that, I would still think it's unethical, right? It would be out of fear, right? Because clearly it'd be forced, right? I would think that God is a moral monster, right? And I think anybody that kills in His name is wrong, is evil. Okay, that's my view, right? And so I don't need a God to tell me that to kill somebody for no reason is wrong. This is if we only had God to argue about morality, society would never function, because people can't even agree about the basic tenets of God for the most part. They all disagree on all kinds of things. So let me ask John, if God ceased to exist because you believe God can cease to be, why would you have any reason to be moral? Would you be immoral? Would your actions, would you just go out and do what you want with no fear of consequences? Because again, if God commanded me kill my only begotten child or my daughter, I would tell him to piss off. And if obviously, when people threaten you with torture and things of that nature, that's obviously a different story. But I wouldn't do it. Would you? And you would, though, right?
Well, I would say no, I don't, because I don't have the desire to do those things. If I did, I probably would.
Your desire doesn't matter. Well, okay. Okay. So wait a minute. And I like that answer, actually. So you don't have the desire to go out and commit atrocities. So why do you need God? I don't need God to tell me. I don't have a desire to go out and commit them either.
Why do I need God? Why do I need God? I don't think we would have morality without God, is my point. So I'm saying, that's, to me, coming from my worldview, we exist because of God. Asking why would we need them would be sort of like a non sequitur.
Well, what you stated was kind of
like a reductio ad absurdum.
No, it doesn't. It literally is. I don't have to have a God because I have no desire to go do those things. You say you don't have desire. So if God vanished right now, both of us would neither of us would have a desire to go have slaves, right? Both of us agree slavery is wrong. Neither of us would want to have slaves, even if God allowed it. So,
well, here's a simple one. I mean, lying. A lot of people would probably not give a shit about lying if God wasn't real. But hey, I do have to go.
All right.
I really appreciate this
Yeah, thank you.
conversation, Steve.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
have one more question for you before I go. A good faith question, no worries. Would you prefer a secular government or a Christian nationalist government?
Is that you legit asking me that? Why would I'm not even Christian? Why the hell would I want a Christian nationalist government? They're just as whack job as freaking MAGA. And look, here's my top 5 of groups that I just cannot stand that I think are irrational. MAGA is I think they're irrational, which is the Christian nationalists and things of that nature. Flat earthers, new atheists, and transgender ideology. And who was the 5th one? I'm sure that I'll reserve the 5th one. But yeah, so no, I ain't got no problem with furries. I don't give a shit about furries. I think they're all just weird, but I don't care. I want a secular society. Absolutely want a secular society. Why would I want Christian nationalism?
Well, I would talk to you more about that. I'd probably mention something along the lines of probably the birth rates would be my main point. But hey, I have to get going. You have a good night, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me talk.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and again, I don't think there's a problem with the birth rate. I think we've got 8 billion people on the planet. We're gonna be
Really?
just fine.
Okay.
Yeah. We're gonna be just fine.
I could go into other stuff, but
there's 8 billion
good
people on the
conversation.
planet. And unfortunately, there are religions that have to have births in order to propagate.
Some interesting propaganda.
Islam loves expanding. They have a high birth rate. Catholics have a high birth rate. Mormons have a high birth rate. And they're expansionists. They love to take over countries without even firing a shot. And I know that's going to be problematic, me saying so, but it's true. I mean, Islam, look what Islam's doing over in the UK. What's the name of it when they take over a government just by birth rate, and they don't assimilate? There's a name for that, and I can't think of it, but it'll come to me. I'm having a terrible time thinking about things tonight. I'm sorry. It's not really my best night, but I'm trying. I wanted to stream, but not really my best night for thinking.
I think there'll be a lot more problems, even in your ethical pluralism, when white people are gone, unfortunately, as we slowly are dying. But
yeah,
y'all have a good night.
That's it too. Steve, I'm going to turn it to you for a second while I go
Thanks, John.
use the restroom.
All right. Well,
Thanks, John. Have a good night. Good talk.
Yep. Good talk,
Thank you,
John.
bye.
Thank you very much. Very
Appreciate
cool.
it.
Did you want to say something? Ritual Paradox. Hello.
Yo, hello.
How are you tonight, my dude?
Doing all right. I think the issues that stems here in the conversation is the fact that we're taking it on the root level of like the ideologies versus the social implications, right? So like you have this issue where morally speaking is not just based well, it is technically based a lot in religion if you want to go that route, right? But it's also based on how it affects your fellow neighbor, right? Because at the end of the day, let's say Christianity wasn't a thing, and we go look back at the story of what's it called? First murderer. I keep forgetting his name right now. But in essence, right?
Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel. Thank you. Yes.
I'm not even a Christian. I know that.
Right. Sorry, I'm not one either. So.
Tell him, brain.
So when you're looking at that story, right, and let's say your neighbor killed somebody, right, and then the justification is because they stole the flock or fleet or whatever, right? At the end of the day, you end up realizing that there's one less labor hand that's helpful throughout the farming. There's or whatever have you, right? So the implications stem further than just the initial cause and reaction as to why that person was murdered. So as a society, as we're developing in a social aspect and how we're very tribal by nature, those things are looked negative upon even by instinct, you know?
Sure, but
and
then
a lot of the time it is like that.
Well, you're allowing murder to be okay. You're essentially signaling to the rest of society that it is okay to murder people and that there is going to be no consequence or punishment for it.
No, that's what I mean by that. It's not okay because it eventually doesn't become okay because of the larger implications of killing somebody, despite the moral premise. You understand? So it might be viewed in a current at the current situation, it'd be okay. But then it shows later down the road how it negatively impacts the herd or the group.
Sure, I think that's definitely a part of it, but in my mind, I think this is just kind of like an extension of the golden rule, like once again, because like if say like, oh, if somebody murders somebody in your society and nothing happens because of it, and actually maybe even some people say that it's a good thing, then you have to be open up to the possibility that you could be murdered as well.
Right. And I think, and at the end of the day, the reason why we even had religion stem forth anyhow was on a moral premise of doing good versus bad, which is why a lot of people go back to, when they think about morals, they think about religion.
Do you think
for the
that,
most part.
What do you think that religion is an outcropping of society trying to formulate rules? Like the Code of Hammurabi was one of the first, actually codified set of moral theory, right? I mean, one of the first, and so was that religious? No, but I mean, it was the predecessor.
I think it was like the start of like what we have modern today, which are what we classify as laws.
Yeah.
And I think it was like the premise of trying to get that started, but they couldn't quite catch people on and just saying, "Hey, rules," right? They had to add the pretense or the fantasy, if you depends on your viewpoint, of there's going to be a higher being that's going to hold you accountable even when no one's watching.
Yeah,
I think Virgil is 100% right, because I think that's archaic frameworks for law that we agree that as human we want predictability and something to just agree upon ourselves, that we expect other people just to reciprocate behavior towards each other and have just a basic rule set of behavior just that we all agree to. And before there were governments and laws, there was religion that was enforcing those things, and it's just archaic laws that
they needed a higher belief system to enforce it because they didn't have the manpower to enforce it.
Let me ask you this, because of the Hammurabi Code. There's different types of justice, right? There's retributive justice and there's restorative justice, and retributive justice doesn't really work that great. Obviously, the Code of Hammurabi was completely, for the most part, retributive, and so it wasn't meant to restore somebody whole. It was actually, the eye for the eye. It was very, very aggressive on how to get people to get in line, because things were more barbaric.
They were tough on crime, so to speak.
But they also, as you pointed out, a lot of people probably felt that people got away with things, and that during life they weren't held accountable. They wanted retribution. Hell is retributive. Hell is retribution. I mean, literally, that's what Christians will argue. It's retribution, right?
Same thing with karma.
Divine retribution and karma. And I think, in karma, I don't think karma exists as some kind of metaphysical thing.
Just as the idea.
I believe karma exists because overall, problematically, if people are going to be shitty people, it's going to catch up to them one day, for the most part. So
I mean, that's kind of the belief, right? At least that's the hope, right? That it would, and logically speaking, statistically speaking, if somebody lives so to speak a life of crime, then eventually one of those crimes is going to come back to bite them, right?
The saying "live by the sword, die by the sword" has meaning because of observations. That's kind of what happens, right? And so I think there's something to be said for that. And I think that hell and Christianity was born out of a want to see people have justice in a retributory manner, which is nothing wrong with that. But
I'm just curious, because die by the sword, I kind of agree with that. But how do you feel about the castle doctrine?
I'm all for the castle doctrine.
Yeah. Well, isn't that retributive justice?
No. Retributive would mean they came into your house, they messed with you, they ran outside, went over the corner, have a beer, you walk into the bar, and you shoot them. That's retributive. That's not justice.
Okay.
That's against the law.
Okay.
But if you're standing your ground in your castle, you have a right to defend yourself.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a moral gray ground there, because you can, there's that law gives people the justification to shoot people even though they're not like literally like a violent threat, so to speak.
It doesn't, because well, okay, I shouldn't say that. Okay, the way it's worded is problematic, and I will give you
It's not
that.
necessarily moral, is what I'm saying.
Because
It's just that
it's in the mind of the shooter at the time, and there's a problem with that, because one, people lie, and you really have to be able to say what was the mens rea at the shooter at the time. Was he in danger? Like just recently, didn't you see on TikTok video on Twitter, where a police officer got high on meth or coke or whatever? He was spun out of his mind, running halfway naked, and he ran into a person's house after trying to like get through the door, and the homeowner.
Oh, I saw
shot
that
him.
video. Yeah.
Yeah. And clearly the homeowner was in the right. I mean, he had a right to defend himself, because in the mind legally. Because in his mind, it was an active threat. But do we often use more force than necessary? Yes. I'm not one to say I'm not hypocritical. I've done that before. I mean, people know that I don't play around. And I will tell you, the last person at my job, when somebody accosted me, I'm just going to tell you, they ended up in the hospital. They left in an ambulance. I don't fuck around, okay? And I think people have a right to defend themselves. And I will fucking defend myself to the best of my ability, and that, it is what it is, right? But I think, do we have an obligation to maybe, use equal force? Yes. But there are times where equal force may not be sufficient in order to neutralize a threat.
Yeah, I think these things are like codified in laws, as in like sort of a constitution, right? And I think we're talking about the Code of Hammurabi earlier. We're talking about the Bible and religions. In my mind, all of these things are sort of like constitutions in its own right, because you live in a society, or like just as like say you have a small friend group. There's sort of like this social contract in the friend group to behave in a certain way or something like that. You're not gonna hurt your friends or whatever, and it's not like you codify that or anything, so everybody kind of intuitively understands it. But as a society grows, not everybody agrees on certain things. There's this big question on whether constitutions infringe on people's rights to infringe on other people's rights, if that makes sense, right? So it's like a constitution, it grants rights to certain individuals in a certain way, and says, if you want to live in the society, you have to live by these rules. And you might not agree with that. You might live in a very oppressive society or oppressive regime. You might disagree with that, and that's fine. But the fact is that it is a constitution, and that it is a social order, right? And that's the order that people lived in. And I think that religion, the Code of Hammurabi, these are all attempts at sort of social order. In a way, it's obviously imperfect. I'm not saying it's perfect or by any means. I don't agree with a lot of religious rules or beliefs or ideologies, but it was certainly at least an attempt at some sort of constitutional, like, right giving and meaning giving of of the people that lived back in the time.
Well, it's actually kind of funny, because the Bill of Rights are actually not rights; they're actually more liberties.
Sure.
With some overlap there. There is overlap, and so when people go, "Oh, Steve's wrong," they're civil rights. Well, technically, they're civil liberties that have overlapped with civil rights. But the Civil Rights Act Civil Rights Act of 1964 codified actual rights, and that was against discrimination for race, religion, creed, color, and sexual orientation, all that. But in the Bill of Rights, those are liberties that we have, such as freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, on all those First Amendment guarantees. But I think that you're right in that we try to codify them in such a way in the Constitution where we say, okay, this is where your liberties start, this is where somebody else's liberties start, and eventually they're going to go head to head with each other somewhere. There might be a little overlap, but you can only do so much to the extent as where it doesn't affect somebody else's civil liberties.
And quick question for the rules that were handed down by God, shouldn't they be perfect by definition?
Unless man got it wrong.
Well, one would say, right? But obviously, I don't believe that. I know a lot of people don't believe it to be true, because I don't think it is true. It's certainly an attempt at like, oh, evoking some sort of intuition that humans had, and then writing it down and saying, okay, everybody that lives in society has to live by this. We have to have some standards by which to live by, and we might as well write something down and go from there.
Okay. Yeah. I can get behind it. I wish John was there just to defend the perfect word of God. But yeah.
Well, quick.
I
So
get
I'm,
behind that.
so on something on Twitter again. This guy on Twitter right now, he's like, "Oh, I know what words mean," and I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I don't think that you actually do. I don't think a lot of these people that think they have an understanding of things actually do, because very few of them. Like, say what you want about John, the guy came in here and he held his own, right? I appreciate that. I admire that. But a lot of people will not come into a panel and express their views to have fair criticism. Was John yelled at? Was he not treated fairly? No. I know, and so this one guy's like, 7 minutes ago, Dr. Mike something, he's like, I know what words mean. I'm like, you had no idea what these words meant until me and four of the people try to explain it to you, because you don't understand semantics, you don't understand linguistics, you don't understand what these terms used are in philosophy. And yet, all I say is, if you believe that you do, come in and have a discussion. But why is it that they don't? Why, especially atheists are the worst at this. Theists will at least come in and talk. But atheists are the freaking worst at defending their freaking claims. Why?
I'm here.
Yeah, I'm
here.
here.
I'm not talking about you guys. You guys are exceptions to the rule, okay? Come on.
I think for the most part, a lot of people's atheism isn't really like an active atheism. I think it's more of like a passive atheism, where it's like they don't really see any reason or justification to believe that any religion is true, and they don't really see a reason to engage in any conversation with that because they don't find really that much meaning in it, or they haven't put much thought into it. I think that's kind of where a lot of people are, like sort of culturally atheist in a way.
But they sit on Facebook and Twitter and talk about it all day long. So
yeah, and I think that
that's what this guy is. He's very superficial. Like I'm so tired of people having you. Okay, in the last I started this at what 6 o'clock, right? Give or take 3 hours, something like 2.5, 3 hours, whatever it is. And we have touched on how many different types of subjects. We have moved from originally philosophy. We moved into physics and cosmology, and talk about material nihilism and moral theory. There's a lot of topics out there that a lot of us have at least read the basics about to have a decent discussion with, at least on a very I admit on a superficial level. But they're not even at that. They're not even at that, and yet they're trying to tell people about a subject that they know absolutely freaking nothing about, not even the basics. And I find that to be detestable. I find that to be worse than flat earthers sometimes, because flat earthers, I believe, know they're full of crap, and they're just stupid. But a lot of these atheists on my Twitter feed, they're worse than that, because they're trying to put forth stuff on subjects they have no idea what they're talking about, and they're
what exactly?
Well, from my experience, the vegans are the worst, because they just ask questions and they think asking questions is an argument. So they ask a question like, "Well, would you send your grandmother to a slaughterhouse?" And obviously not.
I've seen atheists ask the dumbest questions. Atheists ask the dumbest questions. But here, I'm serious. At least and Steve does too here. My co-host, he will answer questions. It's like, bring it on. If you got something to argue, let's just talk about it. And so nobody can say that we are not conversationalists, that we don't put our arguments and positions up for review. But they won't. Yeah, but
a question. A question isn't an argument. So when I ask a vegan back the question, like, how do you determine in any situation between A and B, what is the moral choice? And they say like, well, that depends on how.
Because they never really thought about it, Tom.
Yeah, exactly. And then sometimes they retort back with, well, are you actually arguing for the enslavement of animals? You're just asking a question. in their mind, asking a question is making an argument.
Well, I mean, at least in my mind, in my personal opinion, like theology is kind of like an endless black hole of dog shit. Like you can always you can always find something that like internally critique or internally argue about. Like you can take Harry Potter books, for example, and internally critique it for literally forever, and you would get nowhere in your life. And I just think that
religion's a lot of ad
I
hoc.
I just think a lot, yeah, exactly, and I think a lot of atheists have kind of gotten to the point where they're like, well, they don't really find any value in these conversations, but the reason why that they're still vocal and outspoken about atheism and about theism and things like that is because they see its political and its social impact, and they don't like the way that theism has sort of infected politics and infected our culture.
Okay, that's fine. I agree with that. I know, and promote secularism. Don't promote atheism if you don't know what atheism is. You know, if you don't read a book on atheism, or say one second, if you never read a paper or anything on atheism, why the hell are people out there trying to argue about atheism? That's why I call this Mega-Atheism, because it's about about the subjects of atheism. You know, and it just bugs the crap out of me. There's nothing wrong with secularism. I'm a secularist. I support the Satanic Temple for that very reason. And they're atheist.
Do you guys think mainstream Christianity has been a net negative for humanity up to this point going forward?
I do, but not substantially, where I think that, like, if we had the ability to remove our religion, which we should, I think that I think religion is on its way out overall. So I think that it's on the negative side, but it's marginal, right? So I don't think it's like, 100% evil. I think there's some benefits to religion, but it's definitely on the net negative side. But I'm not an anti-theist, which would argue that it is overall net negative to a substantial degree.
Do you think religion would have naturally thrived if it wasn't violently enforced?
No. No.
That's probably true for just about any system, not human system, or most of them.
Yeah, that is true for most systems that happen in any sort of history. I mean, the idea of the separation of church and state, for example, first came about from governors and other lawmakers suggesting it in 1905. And before that, we were considered a Christian country because the origins are in not only Christianity, but other sects of Christianity.
And it's not necessarily even by violence, but it's also by legal means. I mean, look, like we do, these struggle sessions on the weekends. Not this week, but next week I am. But excuse me, I'm sorry. Oops.
I consider that to be sort of a subset of violence, if that's being pedantic.
Possible. But here's the thing: it's always by force, right? If you're using violence to mean force, then yes, it would be a subset because legalities would be by force. That if you don't agree with us, we're going to take legal measures. We're seeing that right now with the case with Tickle versus Grover. Giggle. I mean, Tickle versus Giggle. I'm not even making that up. That is actually the name of the case. Tickle versus Giggle. And it's basically a mentally unwell man who says that he has the right to go on a application that was strictly for women and girls. And that's absolutely just mind-blowingly ridiculous.
What was the case exactly?
It's called Tickle versus Giggle. Sal Giggle. She's on Twitter, and I follow her, and so I get all the updates. But basically, she invented an app just for girls and for women. And Tickle claims that he is a biological woman, and that he should, and he's not. And that he should access to it, but he's just a creep.
Oh,
perv on girls, young girls.
A transgender person.
Here we go.
And so we've had those types of discussions.
Well, you said mentally ill though.
Oh, he's mentally ill. Yeah, he's extremely mentally ill. He just wants to perv on girls. This is the same.
Is that a California thing?
No, this is in Australia.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And the court has ruled against Giggle, saying that he's allowed to, but they think that the Supreme Court of the land there is going to overturn that because it just makes no sense. It's completely asinine. This is like the same thing with guys, claiming that they're lesbians by going to a lesbian bar, and if a lesbian doesn't want to date them, they think that it's they're being persecuted. It's absolutely just surreal.
Well, that doesn't make any sense though, because
Well,
why
that's
would
what we
they're
agree.
not?
It makes no sense. I mean, but this is what's happening in society, and they're using force by legalities to implement their belief. Because you had mentioned, religion had taken a hold if it wasn't promoted by violence, or in this case, by legalities, so by force by some means. And I said no. Well, the same thing by the transgender agenda. That would not have taken force if not because of a very aggressive approach that people somehow got into power that made it into legalities and things of that nature, that you accept it or there's going to be consequences. That's by force. But people have had enough of it, just like I think they've had enough of religion, that is on the decline.
There is a German gym that is the concept was it was just for females, and one transgender person who identifies as a female tried to legalize herself to become a member of that, and this gym had to either accept that person to be a member, even though she's physically a man, she identifies as a female.
Yeah, that's absurd.
Or pay a fine
Or
of
pay a fine.
200,000 euros.
Yeah, that's by force. That's
and
accept it or by force you will.
And this gym had to close down.
Yeah. And this is the same thing with the app. The app had to be closed down because she was trying to find a safe space for girls. And I'm sorry, but if you're a man and you want to talk to a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old child, I mean, there's young girls in there, because you think you're a woman, that's predatory. That's predatory, straight up predatory.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
There's no other way to look at this.
It's mind-boggling. The amount of, I mean, we are also talking about a minority of the population making these actions and taking these actions just so the rest of the world have to legitify their ideology. It's
right.
Crazy.
What ideology?
And that's why we have these struggle sessions. And like I said, we're going to be having them next Saturday if you're free, Steve. Mary Kate will be back with us because she likes it. She really. And agree with Mary or disagree with her. She's willing to put her views to the test, and you got to respect that, man. No, it's not. Yeah. You're not my mother.
Mary Kate. Oh, fuck off. Mary Kate is batshit insane.
I love her.
Way too out there. Fuck her.
I don't agree with her. But I agree with her on a lot of things.
I can agree with you, Steve, to some measure, but she's way out there. There's no way. Trump's funny, but he's batshit insane. What? That's not the.
What do you disagree with Mary on? I mean, I disagree with Mary on a few things too. But my argument was this: we all don't have to agree on things. And my arguments that I have against Mary, I'm going to address with her next session because certain things that got brought up, I wasn't able to really suss out my point of view because some woman kept trying to interrupt me every 2 seconds, and after she asked me questions, and I'm like, and all she wants to do is call me, misogynist, and I'm like, this is.
Yeah, well, that's the main thing. That's because you're way out there. I don't agree with you about trans issues. You know that. Yeah. But I am right. Them, they were telling you that you were a threat to women.
That was amazing, wasn't it? That was
mind-blowing. My mind was fucking blown because
Mary wasn't really doing that, but the other one was, and I'm like, really? I'm like, damn.
I believe she did too.
Maybe a little bit. Like I said, but I'll talk with that next time. But it's just like, my argument was going to be, but I never got a chance to suss it out because one woman kept fucking just wouldn't let me get my position out.
Women,
right?
Are you kidding me? Several women were dogpiling on you.
I know, and I was trying to let them.
I felt bad.
Yeah,
I wanted to disagree with you, but I felt bad because they were just piling on.
It was a struggle session. That there's a reason why it's called struggle sessions. These were actual things that happened in Red Communist China. So I'm like, okay, bring it on. But I have to be able to articulate my position. See, when I was talking to John, we were able to have a flowing back and forth discussion, right, on moral theory.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah. And so it's very difficult to have that with certain people, and not with Mary at all, but other people that came in that were just throwing things out there. But my argument would have been something along the lines of, by calling somebody a misogynist, you're doing the same thing that trans activists are doing by calling the people transphobes when you're trying to shut down the dialogue. It's the same exact thing. It's hypocritical.
Yeah, it is extremely hypocritical.
I know, but I wasn't able to get any of that out because I kept getting shut
when
down.
that was happening, I had to hit the mute button, and I bet you that first woman that kept interrupting you blamed you for me hitting the mute button.
I didn't mute them. I didn't.
I had to mute them, like, because I was co-host. I'm not co-host now in this space because I had to leave and come back because I wasn't hearing Tom right. But I was co-host in that particular space, and I, after someone for the third time in a row would speak over Steve, I would just mute everybody, and when I interjected, I was like, okay, listen, we are not talking over everybody. The point of a struggle section is for Steve to be able to challenge anybody's points that they bring at him. If you are not going to hear him out, you do not need to make a point.
Well, it's bidirectional. I challenge them, and they want them to challenge me, right? The struggle sessions are for them to challenge me, but I get to challenge them back. That's what makes it fair, right? But a lot of people don't want to have, like the atheists out there on the Twitter sphere. A lot of them don't want to have their views challenged, so they're legit scared the shit out of me or from me. They don't want to deal with me because they know that I'm going to put up a hell of a refutation. Like, for example, I still am looking for people that will argue my paper. Do you know how many atheists are willing to be able to do that? Zero.
Yep.
It blows my fucking mind when people are like, oh, well, hey, Steve, I'll change my mind with an argument or logic and reason. Okay, here's a valid and sound proof. Where's the problem with it? And you know what? I had one atheist, Steve, one atheist on Facebook one time, and
only
he
one.
Said, one. And this is what happened. He said, I'll look at your paper, and I'll give you an objective thing on it. And this is a true story. And I said, because I was a little flippant, right? Because I'm still the a-hole pope of agnosticism. And I said,
of course you are.
I said, well, okay, but you probably won't even understand it because 9 times out of 10, 99% of the time they don't understand it. I was wrong. He did understand the paper, and I actually apologized to him in the group on a post. And I said I was wrong. I said he wouldn't understand it. He absolutely did, and he actually wrote a peer review paper on Academic EDU, and he agreed with my paper, and he found no issues with it. As an atheist.
As an atheist.
You know how rare that is. But he actually was like, damn, this is actually a pretty good paper. And he wrote a very good review on it. He had some, criticisms like any other thing, but they were minor. They weren't even about the logic. It was about expository, which is fine. I think he was probably right on a couple of them because again, I'm not a trained paper writer kind of stuff, right? But he did understand it, and he's like, yeah, you're right on this. I think that atheists are scared to argue with me when they have no ability to argue against something that's objectively the case. When they have a subjective matter, they can argue all they want. We could sit here until the cows come home to argue whether pineapple belongs on pizza or not, right? There's no objective fact of the matter to be had. But when it comes to logic, there is some objectivity. There's some objective facts to be had there. And my paper, I believe, is objectively valid and sound, which means that it is logically correct and the premises are true. And nobody has ever shown me otherwise. Nobody.
Steve, can you tell me why do you think that these people are scared of you? Because it doesn't make actually rationally any sense.
Because there's no objective. Because they don't like arguing things that are objective, right? If you look at Matt Dillahunty, right? You think Matt Dillahunty could ever argue against my paper? No, he only argues things that have no objective fact of the matter about the God or something like that, right? Because we don't have God here.
Paper called?
What's that? And I would take.
Yeah, but Matt Dillahunty is a special case. He has he has a sort of following. He doesn't want to lose followers.
Right. I get that. Yeah.
Wait, just seriously, because I agree with Steve's paper. I've read it. It makes sense, but I'm a strong atheist. I do take offense from Tom and Brainworm because I'm an atheist in here.
Well, yeah, I'm not talking about you
I
all in here.
do agree.
You're
No,
the
no,
exceptions for the rule. You know.
No, yeah, well, but well, I do take offense for from Tom and Brainworms for saying that atheists won't come in here and debate it. I'm here. Just
We're talking about
direct
but
your
Dan,
question
hang
at
on,
me.
hang on,
I'm
Dan,
here.
hang on,
I
Dan.
was not making
Dan,
a
you've been.
statement.
Hey, one sec, Dan. You've been following me for a very long time. We always know that you're coming. You're talking about things because you're capable of having those discussions. When we're saying that atheists won't, we're not talking about people that we know. We're talking about people that I've never met before, hardly, or don't even know, and that see my work instead of like actually having a rational argument against it, they just go to invective. I've been called a theist every day of my life, I think, by
I
in
believe
Facebook.
I believe Steve, you used the word generally.
Can I talk
Yes.
to Ben, please? Just
Yes,
a
go ahead.
moment.
Absolutely.
I don't think I made a statement that should offend you. I was just asking a question. If I made a statement that offended you, I'm sorry. Basically, I am a
Friendship.
former atheist as well. I'm as well a former fanboy of Matt Dillahunty. But I moved on, so I don't know what statement did I make
And
that
you're
offended.
now you're a fan of mine. That's gotta hurt to
Yeah,
Dillahunty.
no,
You know?
Tom, what I said when I said I take offense is because if you're talking about atheists aren't willing enough to be in here defending their views, I'm here.
Yeah. Well, again,
While you're saying it, I
we're not-
will
but
defend
we're
my
not
views.
talking. We're
Uh,
talking
uh,
about
but
talking
it's
about-
not.
asking the
I
question.
no, yeah,
I
but
was
by
asking the
taking
question.
offense,
How
I
about
meant
this? How about this? How about this?
no,
Random.
it's not.
How about this, Dan? Random atheist. There you go. Now,
Yeah,
that-
yeah,
there you go.
random.
Fill
No,
in.
no,
Okay.
that's good. But
Okay,
I
good.
didn't take personal offense, but it's just for at large. And I don't hate you. I like you. You're here and you're talking about it,
You're
and
here.
that's cool.
Yeah,
I
you're
like
here.
it. Yeah,
Um,
and you're on my good side, Tom. It's not
Tom's
that
awesome.
I am offended by you or anything, and that's all cool.
But you know what's funny,
It's
Dan?
just yeah.
You know what's funny is that Tom's been around a very long time, and Tom actually objectively looked at the stuff just like you did. That's the difference, right? That's the difference because the atheist on Twitter and Facebook, these people that have never been into a voice chat with, they're not willing to objectively look at something because I think they lack the ability to do so, and that scares them. And that's fine. They don't have. Not everybody knows how to attack an argument properly. But I can tell you, it doesn't take a genius to know you don't attack an argument by going after the individual. I mean, I have had people on Facebook say the
don't get me
weirdest
started.
shit about me, like I'm some kind of closet theist promoting Christianity, and I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Nobody in the right mind would think that about me. You could call me an asshole, you could hate my guts, but no rational person could ever say that I'm a closet Christian. That is weird to me.
Yeah. Don't get me started about the whole attacking identities. It seems that's
Right?
all the trans rights activists really have now.
Well,
With
yeah,
all
that's
the
because,
different ways.
again, I put them on the same level as New Atheist. New Atheist and
Yeah.
trans right activists both have inabilities to articulate and formulate coherent, rational responses and argumentation. And I've noted this. I've said this for a very long time. This is why I think that all those types of movements are on the decline because they don't hold up in the court of public opinion and the arena of open thought. And when you have a society, as Brain was talking about earlier with memes and called memetics, the best ideas are going to tend to rise to the surface. So I'm not, and so maybe I'm not recognized now for my work on atheism, but that doesn't mean my arguments are not valid, and so you won't see people like Matt Dillahunty for that very reason ever address my argument because one, he doesn't want to lose his following, two, he doesn't have the ability to do so, and three, even if I was right, he would never admit it because it would just destroy everything that he's built. Same with On Raw, same thing. Although it is very telling because this is the actual name of this hangout here. Matt Dillahunty does agree that agnostic atheist is nonsensical. Maybe not for the exact same reasons, but he does agree that my arguments are correct. And he actually changed his mind because of my arguments on agnostic atheism. It was my arguments, and he'll never admit this, but it was my arguments. because my arguments were what was going around when he started spewing some of the things and paraphrasing exactly what I was arguing when nobody else was doing it, and then throwing in my name in there occasionally, and then saying, "Oh well, the agnostics do get it right," he once said. But he does mention my name whenever the subject of agnostic atheist comes up. He almost always mentions my fucking name, and says, "Okay, yeah, he's right on that one thing," but he really won't admit that it was my arguments that got him to change his views. But I guarantee it was.
Are you saying in the thesis of your paper, if I'm summarizing this correctly, are you saying that like the word atheism kind of encompasses too much meaning to have meaning?
No. The thesis.
Or maybe
no,
I
not even
said that wrong.
No, the thesis of my paper was based on Graham Oppy's view that if we have, if we take on board Anthony Fleur's presumption of atheism that he wrote in 1972, if we take that on board, his entreaty to do so, to have weak atheism, it epistemically commits us to weak theism. And I prove logically, by way of semiotic square of opposition, that weak theism, and agnosticism are all the same position, which means a devaluation, an axiological devaluation of terminology, which I call semantic collapse. Because you could conceivably have a person who is an atheist, an agnostic, and a theist all at the same time, which is almost like a veridical paradox. It makes no sense, although it could happen because of linguistics and semantic content, that when you start using these what's called sensu lato uses of terminology. I don't use that in my paper, but that's basically what it is.
Yeah, I think I understand. Maybe I didn't articulate myself correctly, but yeah, I think like the idea that a lot of people kind of call themselves atheists, even though they don't have the belief that like, oh, the God doesn't exist exactly. I think that for the most part, people kind of use like these, I should say maybe like suitcase words in order to kind of describe their ideology, because maybe they don't have the necessary tools to describe it properly.
Yeah,
But you have to get all the way on the other side, because the weak atheist and the weak theist basically have the same position.
Mm-hmm.
They're the same.
Yeah. Logically, I mean, they're indistinguishable from each other. And the issue with this is that when you look at it logically, when you set forth the canonical relationships between what's called contraries, subcontraries, subalternations, and contradictions, there has to be a logical congruency there. And I've asked people, look, the easiest way to defeat my paper is literally just show me what these positions are on the square. And I have a visual representation. I did a visual supplemental, which I don't think Tom or Dan may have even read, but I did a visual supplemental that shows these relationships. And I'm like, okay, walk me through this. Show me what you would use for your terms on the square here to show these canonical relationships. To date, nobody's been able to do so because it always goes back to the way it is in philosophy to make it coherent. The lack of belief atheist cannot coherently make a schema. At least nobody has so far. I don't think they can, right? Because maybe I'm biased, but the fact that nobody's been able to, it's pretty telling.
So I haven't read your paper, but is this like the 5th grade representations of circles, and you're inside of one circle, and certain circles oversect each other, and then you find yourself with a group that you don't actually want to be with in a group because you find these people are icky, and then you claim, no, actually, I'm not these. I'm not that part of that group.
No,
I want to be something else.
Tom, actually, it reinforced my willing to commit to a position. Personally, I've read this paper, but at that time I was more of the undecided agnostic atheist, and then I read that, and it made a lot of sense, and just that pushed me to really ask the question for my towards my own beliefs, and it pushed me further toward atheism.
And I love that. And I love that, to be honest
not-
with you. Because I've been charged with, people. Steve just wants to promote agnosticism. I'm like, I've converted more people to atheism than I have agnosticism by far. Like not even close.
I believe that.
But I just sent you, Dan, a DM of my visual representation. And take a look at it because it clicks. It just clicks by looking at it visually because I'm a visual learner myself. So I know you are. I know you understand it. I'm not. But this should actually even make it even better to show you exactly how it works.
Steve,
Brain, I can
why,
send you two
why
if you want.
don't you just spam the paper in every description of every video that you put up
I
on
do
YouTube? So-
pretty much. All my
you
videos
do?
have my paper. I have it.
I was about to.
Yeah, I do. And by
I
the way,
was about to
my
say.
paper has almost 5,000 views, and right now it's sitting at the top 4%. But it was in the top 0.5, top 1% for 2 years. It was the number one in the top 1%. That's unusual because I read a lot of papers, and I got to tell you, most papers only get about 200 to 300 to 400 views. Most. Even one I did a review on, which was Dr. Malik's paper, who helped me write. He didn't help me write my paper, but he helped me get some traction on it and kind of helped me a little bit with it. He was indispensable, to say the least.
Okay, so
I mean, I
maybe-
suppose
maybe-
most papers aren't really talking about things that are culturally relevant, though.
That might be true.
So
Yeah,
maybe I
go ahead.
even read your paper, Steve, but I thought it was just the plain obvious thing.
Well,
So I don't remember.
I don't know. Hey, Brainworm, do you want me to send it to you too? The visual?
I have it right now.
Do you have the visual?
I have it. I have the paper.
No,
It's
no.
10 pages. Right?
Yeah, but the visual representation is the supplement to it.
Let me see here. Oops,
If-
sorry,
if-
it's
it's-
dropping
if you-
things.
If you go to Academic EDU, I have 4 papers up there. two or more than essays, but whatever.
I was a little scared about what Tom said about like promoting that paper because I thought he was going to say on X. I was going to say, dude, every time Steve promotes something, I get 20 plus notifications, guaranteed.
Yeah, I know.
Would have blown my notifications.
Sorry.
High
I do.
doing that.
Brainworm, message me real quick on Twitter.
Yeah, okay.
So I got to add you too, by the way. But I'll send you the visual representation. Makes it really so much easier to kind of look at it as you go through my paper to see what's going on. And you can see when I ask people, okay, what do you put in the S1, S2 position? What do you put in the not S2, not S1 position? What do you put in the not S position? You'll know exactly what I'm talking about because I tell people, okay, if you find my paper wrong, how do you want to label these positions? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 positions. There's the S1, S2, not S1, not S2, not S1 and not S2, and S and S, not S positions. Those all need terminologies to be distinct from each other, or else you have axiological evaluation.
But Steve, to be honest, I still believe that a lot of people that are giving you opposition, they realize that your paper is correct, and they just don't want to be put into this group because it's icky.
Yeah.
They actually want to be in some other group.
Yeah, I know. It's a lot of them just take the piss. I get it. But it is funny though because, I'm out there going, hey, atheist, you always want an argument that's logical. Here you go, and they just shut the fuck up.
Steve, legit question though. I know you use this paper to just to debunk atheist position, but
Well, not
if I
atheist
were,
position. No, I show the problem with lacktheism.
yeah, oh wait, yeah, like
Right,
theism, but
right. Because I'm pro for atheism, obviously. I mean, I support atheism.
Yeah.
But not
But-
the lacktheist. Yeah.
how much would a theist would agree with the valid positions around that graph?
Well, it's a good question because I went on Trinity Radio and I was interviewed with Dr. Braxton Hunter and Dr. Jonathan Pritchett. And before I went on that interview, Dr. Pritchett read my paper, and believe it or not, he actually found an error. It wasn't a logical error; it was a word error. But he understood my paper well enough to go, "I think you mean this." And you know what I did? Do you know what I did?
You
I
correct
blocked,
it?
I blocked him forever, and I told him never to talk to me again, and I denied the interview. No, I changed
As
it.
you should.
As they should, exactly. Thank you. I fixed it. I looked at, I listened to what he said. I looked at my paper. I analyzed it. I thought about it, and I said to myself, "Fuck, he's right. He's right. He's right." And I fixed it. I put the new copy up, and then we went ahead with the interview. That's how you do it. That's how you show me I'm wrong, because he was right. So when somebody shows me that I have an error in my paper, I fix it. But that was the last time, and that was about 1.5 years ago. And other than that, he's like, "Yeah, this is a good paper. This is legit." And it was a minor error. And if you really want to know what it was, I had used the word contrary instead of subalternation, or vice versa. Stupid mistake, right? But he understood the differences in the terminology to say, "Don't you mean subalternation here?" I'm like, "Fuck, you're right." That's it. That was what it was.
Do you have your DMs on? I don't see it.
Oh, you got to follow me first.
Hang on.
But my question is
This is rather
basically
recent. This is July of this year
What?
that you linked.
What do you mean? This visual paper? Oh yeah, it's relative. I only put it out like 4 months ago. My supplemental was 4 months ago. My paper is from
no,
2022.
the next correction. Yeah, it's
okay.
been on for a while.
Yeah. What I sent you, Dan, was not was not on my original paper. It was a visual supplemental to that paper.
Yeah.
Because somebody had said, "Hey, Steve, because a lot of people aren't really understanding the argument, is there a way you can make it more visual for like visual learners and things of that nature by doing a supplemental?" I'm like, yeah, I could do that. So I did.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's useful.
But
Thank you.
Yeah,
yeah,
thank you.
my question is that, and it's very effective at just getting above the agnostic atheist. It does it very well. But what does it do to Christian fundamentalists?
I don't think it doesn't really change anything at all. That's not.
Well,
fair.
they don't really agree that there's any other option available that just being.
I don't know. I mean, my paper
Theistic.
really is. You know, it's so funny, dude. When I ask somebody what my paper is about, because a lot of people have said they've read my paper, and I know they're lying. Here, I'll tell you what it is. I'll tell you the most succinct way just to say I understood the paper. All you have to say is it refutes Flu's argument. That's it. It refutes Flu's argument. That's all you got to say, or attempts to refute. I don't care if you give me credit. That's what my paper does, is argues against Antony Flu's 1972 paper of the Presumption of Atheism. That's what my paper's about. Whether you know the specificities, the details, the logic, the philosophy, is irrelevant. If somebody doesn't even know that that's my paper is about refuting Flu, how the fuck am I supposed to take them seriously? Like, legit, how?
Yeah.
Because it's like wait a minute, that my whole paper is to refute Flu's argument and to show that Oppie is correct. And if somebody can't understand, I had one guy, I swear to God, dude, he was just like, "Well, your paper's wrong because this is what you said about Oppie, but Oppie disagrees with you. Oppie is arguing, you haven't shown Oppie's wrong." I'm like, "No, my paper actually is to argue that Oppie's right." And he's like, "Oh, okay, never mind." I was like, "Damn."
Yeah. Well, I don't disagree. I do agree with your work on all of this. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think that most people would if they actually objectively looked at it, but I can't even get new atheist to even take a look at it, right? I can't get them to come in and challenge me on it, which is unfortunate because again, Steve and I have Twitter Spaces all the time, and we're like, "Bring it on! What you got?" You didn't hear me cower away from a discussion with John because it was silly. It was good dialogue. That's the kind of discussions I want because I'm tired of people go, "Oh, Steve has an echo chamber," or Steve's shilling for his show or whatever. No, I didn't even put this on the Non Sequitur show. It's on. I am live on my other channel, but I did this because I like to have the discussions. But I can go on any channel. I don't give a shit. Pick one. Just
how can you learn? How can you learn from a different point of view if you're not willing to disagree? You can't.
Because they don't want to be they don't want their paradigm evaluated and criticized, and that's the same thing.
And
I
that
find
means
for a lot of
they're
other groups.
unwilling to learn.
Yeah, I know. So, anyways, we got some other people in here. They want to chime in. Chime in. V, what you got? I see you.
Yeah, hey Steve. I'm trying to find the paper, man. I can't find it. Could you send it to me in a DM? I followed you to try to DM you, but I couldn't get it.
Yeah. I
Appreciate it.
I gotta find you here though. So I'll send you the paper and the supplemental. Is that cool?
Cool. Thanks, man. Yeah, I
You're welcome.
appreciate it.
Do you want to
Thank
weigh
you.
in with anything so far while I'm doing that for you?
Yeah, so actually, I just came across this on the X Spaces. I'm not fully understanding what your position is. I'm a Christian, so if you want, I don't know if this is the space to discuss this now,
Anything
or
you
if
like,
it's
man.
strictly about atheism. It's up to you, but I was just interested in the conversation overall. So
Yeah, no, anything you like. What you got? I mean, talk about Christianity. It's open forum right now.
So can you maybe just clarify briefly your position, just so I understand what it is?
On the question of God.
Yeah, so
I'm
I
agnostic.
take it you're not an atheist. It
No.
sounds like you don't like that term. That's what I'm
Yeah.
getting. So
Well, it's
yeah,
not that I
okay.
dislike the term. It's just not my position, right? And so if
Right.
it's not my position. And when people say that Steve's an atheist, it doesn't match my philosophical position. So it's very confusing when I have to explain to them my nuanced positions on things, right? And
Right.
it's infuriating because they just want to lump me in because they don't want to take the time to really understand the distinctions between these terminologies. And
Yeah,
I
that's
did find you,
interesting.
so I did find you, and I'm going to send you my paper first and then the supplemental. Sound good?
No, I appreciate it, man.
got it,
Thank you.
man.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
so knowledge and belief, right? So let's see if we're on the same page here. So belief, I would take as, let's say, simply accepting something as true. Knowledge is more of a justified true belief.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's how. And then,
Okay,
yeah,
that's where
100%.
we'd be in the same. All
Yeah.
right, cool. It sounds like we're in tandem against the atheists. I like it, man. This is
No,
good.
I support atheism. I mean,
No, I'm kidding. I'm trying to find common ground. That's all. Anyway, I don't want to take up the chat. Thanks for
no,
having me,
go
guys.
ahead.
I'll chime
No,
in whenever.
it's all good. So I sent you two things. The,
Cool.
The first one is the actual paper. They look alike. They're actually two different links. Okay.
Beautiful. I'll take a look at it. Thanks,
I appreciate
guys.
it. Please DM me or even make it public. I don't care. Let me know what you think. I
Absolutely.
really do want to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take a look at it.
Yeah. So it is funny because I try to build bridges, right? I like to talk to Christians or whatever, and then in the last struggle session we had, if you remember, Steve, I was being criticized for not using the quote pronoun that had to do with the purpose of gender, right? And I thought that was kind of funny.
Right.
I was like, because and Jessica did message me, by the way, and she was like, by the way, thank you for standing up to me. You didn't have standing up for me. You didn't have to, but she was like, well, I really did appreciate it. They weren't going to listen to what you had to say, and I go, I understand that. But I was trying to make the argument that look, why antagonize people unnecessarily if you want to have discussions with them, right? Because as a free absolutist, for the most part, I put free speech as one of the highest priorities over anything else because as Michael Sherlock had pointed out that free speech is important, and without free speech you're not going to be able to change the mind of anybody. So when they were starting to say that I was like misogynistic for doing that I was buying into their delusions of transgender and all this other stuff, they weren't looking at it from a higher epistemic vantage point, and I find that to be disconcerting because when we do have the next struggle session I will be bringing all that up. But I want them to at least be able to try to acknowledge that when I do something, I do it with intent. And I do it with a vantage point of, let's look at it from a higher vantage point than this base level bullshit that we see on Twitter and Facebook, a puerile argumentation of things like, oh, Sky Daddy, right? That's not how you argue against a theist. That's not going to get you anywhere.
No. And what was odd to me through that entire thing was it was the opposite of the trans argument that I always have when it comes down to pronouns. But all the women were levying, well, you need to defend our pronoun. Like, what in the world? What? Like, it was the opposite. Like, whereas trans people are like, you need to call me by my pronoun. These, and I'll just use the term feminists, obviously new wave feminists, were screaming, you need to defend our pronouns from being used. What in the world?
It was kind of lacking as a little bit of self-reflection, but again, building bridges, right? And because I love talking to Mary, I really do. And I'm so grateful that she's willing to have these discussions. I'm fortunate that people will actually want to go head to head with her because she can be intimidating. Let's be honest here.
Oh yeah, she was very on point with her points though. So like I have to give her credit.
She's
Not
smart.
only
I know.
not only was she intimidating, but she knew exactly where to strike with every question.
She was very good at that, right?
Yep.
I thought the same thing. She was very pinpoint in her argumentation. And matter of fact, like I said, had I been able to suss out my positions better, I would have had a better responses. But as you saw what happened, fuck, man, I couldn't get a word in edgewise with that woman.
Yeah,
Not
that's
Mary,
why I
but the
was
other
there,
woman.
man. Like even if I think I have to work next Saturday, but like I'll hop in while I'm working as a co-host, and if things get rowdy, man, I've got your back. I'll
I don't even know if it's going to be Saturday or Friday next week. It's open right now, so it's like I said, it's either Friday or Saturday. I'm trying for Saturdays. It's usually better for me, but there's a lot of factors that are involved with that. Like right now,
definitely. Well,
you know,
let
I
me
have
know
silence
because
in my house, so I can be quiet. I don't have a lot of background noise, which is a big thing. Like I said, if you guys noticed, my mic is better than it was last two sessions, wasn't it?
better, way clearer.
Way better, right? I spent some time fixing the acoustics and doing some other stuff, so I was like, damn, this is going to sound way better tonight, I have a feeling.
And it does sound way better. Let me know on that, Steve,
I will.
so that I can try to plan around it. The other night I had the show, and it's now tomorrow, so I'm gonna hit the hay. Thanks
Sound
for
good?
having me. I appreciate the conversation with Dan, with Tom, with John, Brain, Axiom had a couple good things in there. Virtual was here. I mean, like these are always great spaces
hangout.
whenever you host them.
Oh,
This is always a
thank you.
great space and great YouTube viewing as well. When it comes down to it, y'all are getting a treat with Steve shows.
Oh, you're the best, and it's kind of cool that I'm able to do them again because I wasn't for about a year. I just didn't have the heart, and now things are going well, and I feel better. I mean, I sound better. I know I do. So.
Oh yeah, you sound very energetic, man. I hope that keeps going.
Thank you.
But I'm gonna hit the hay so
Yeah,
that I can be
go to bed,
energetic
hit
in
me
the
up, and
morning.
I'll let you know. And I'll wrap this up soon. I just want to make sure everybody else gets what they want in. I know I see Sheila out there, and I think that's about it. You want to say anything, Sheila? You want to come up? And who's the other person down there? Tiny Megan or Megan or Tiny Magoo? Is that what it is? Yeah, Tiny Magoo. Feel free to come up.
Well, I wanted to say as well, thank you for having me. I'm heading out. I don't usually join these very often, as you know,
But I love it when you do.
it was a nice
This was fun. This was good.
nice thing. So I'm heading out. So thanks for having me and good night. Bye
Yeah,
bye.
and
Welcome, Tom.
Tom, we had a little bit of back and forth on the YouTube, and I do enjoy those. So no hard feelings. And even if we disagree, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
I love when people
and
disagree, man.
thank you
That
for
makes it fun.
collaborating.
If we all agreed, it would be boring as shit. And by the way, I lost my live chat on my YouTube, so I put it up bigger on my OBS. If you guys ever get that bug where your live chat doesn't show on YouTube, like if you're in dark mode, it just shows a blank space, and then like 5 minutes later, it all of a sudden comes through, or you try a different browser. You guys have that problem? It's just me. It's me. Okay, whatever.
Well, I think it kind of does, but I'll just want to say that no hard feelings. That's just fun. The interaction is fun, and
Yeah, no hard
feelings.
feelings either side. So thanks for having me.
You're
Bye
welcome.
bye.
I'm gonna wrap it up here. So, thank you, mods who came by, Frankie and Shill, Kimomaki, 3 excellent moderators. Dan the Machine, Outside the Cube, Skeptic77, and X Forbidden One all got memberships to my channel now, thanks to Artistic Shell. So thank you, Artistic Shell. Tom, he was in there. Thank you. And then Brain, V, Dan, Sheila, thank you guys. I appreciate it. I'm going to wrap it up myself. V, please let me know what you think after you read my paper and my visual supplemental. I will be doing more hangouts on those papers and stuff like that, like I try to do. But next week, I'm going to, again, try to have my struggle session where we talk about transgender ideology and the issues with it. and it's going to be called "Going Balls Deep." So, yeah, that's.
I love it. I'll make sure to read the paper, and I'm pretty sure we're going to see eye to eye on the transgender issue. So, just a guess.
And here's the funniest thing before I wrap it up.
Sure.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, we all have a little bit of ego, and we like when people agree with us. But I got to tell
Of
you,
course.
it's no fun. It's not as fun.
No, it's not.
Fun.
It's not.
It's not.
I didn't want to come and
Steve.
ruin. I didn't want to ruin the Black Panther Party to take from Forrest Gump and be that only Christian that starts putting out objections to atheism.
No, I've been here. I was here for like 2 hours talking to John. He was a Christian. He was doing
cool.
pre-supplemental apologetics.
I think that guy was a Nazi, wasn't he?
Hey, wait.
He was
I'm not a Nazi
he was a
for the record,
self-proclaimed
so.
griper. And, I mean, at least Nazi adjacent.
Wait, who was the griper? Who was?
What's his name? I just
John?
forgot. Yeah, John.
Was he?
That literally is what it said on his bio. He was a griper.
Stop it. So he follows what's that guy's name? Frentis?
Yeah, well, he was pushing out a lot of the groiperist rhetoric. I don't know if you noticed or not, but I didn't want to say.
No, but he did ask me about Christian nationalism. He's like, would you rather have Christian nationalism or secularism? I thought that was an odd question.
Yeah, and then he's talking about things about birth rates and probably leading to something.
Right.
Yeah, I won't be on that.
Pick on those stuff pretty easy.
Okay, so before I end this, I will say this: there's a couple subjects that I will never talk about really. It just I made that decision years and years ago. I do not engage with Holocaust deniers, and I don't engage with Nazis. It's just in white supremacists. I'm just not interested in those discussions.
You don't believe in their free speech?
Oh, sure, but that doesn't mean I have to discuss it with them, right?
Yep.
I see.
Right?
Steve, man, I'm starting to think we're on the same team here, man. I don't know what's going on. This is kind of weird.
But we're an agnostic out of you yet.
That's right.
I do have a legit question though,
sure.
Because for the whatever sessions, the what is it called, the thing session, whatever, because V,
yes,
are you blue? Are you a black dude?
No, I'm not. I'm Italian. Good guess.
You're Italian.
You sounded totally Italian, man.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. I'm French Canadian,
like
so I don't know accents.
No, I could have told you that he was probably Italian.
Well, Dan, let me ask you: are you Brazilian?
No. I'm French Canadian. So
French Canadian. Okay, I was way off too. All right, one for one.
That's all fair. But
so French Canadian is basically somebody who's a snob with food and can't say garage right.
Just eat.
That's a French Canadian.
Just eat poutine, you're all right. But the main thing is because of for advocating, because I feel really uncomfortable for coming up on stream and defending trans right. Wow. I'm a cis white male. I don't feel deserving, because if I were to come on stream and just defending, let's say, African American rights,
why you have an
that
opinion
feels icky. Yeah,
no,
I got the opinion, but that's
why.
white 90. That's
well, Dan, what if we just approach it from a moral perspective, maybe morality?
Even more so. Let me argue this, Dan, before I go. If it was only those people in the minority that had a voice, and the other people that were in the majority that didn't have that similar voice, then the majority would never be able to propagate their views. Right? It wasn't the minority of the slaves that had a voice and able to change the laws and to have abolition. It was the voice of the mainstream. So that's important. So you don't have to be of a specific ethnic origin or skin color or sexuality to argue your position. Right? It just makes no sense. It makes no sense, because if not, you're just leaving it to minorities to do. And the majority is the ones that have the empowerment of the voice. It should be the majority that speaks out with the minorities. And I don't mean minority as specifically black, but minority as the lesser group. They need, and again, I may not agree with your position, but you have every right and obligation to argue if that's your views. You know, to stand up for them. As a majority, you should stand up for the oppressed. That make sense?
Yeah.
You know, so don't think for
thanks.
a second that it should
Okay.
only be this is why I hate it when I hear things like, and I did in the last struggle session, like about women speaking or listen to women. Well, not all women agree with things either, right? When you can't just say listen to women, because half of the women out there don't agree with the other half of the women. So you cannot make it about gender or sex. You have to make it about the facts, the evidence, the logic, and the reason.
Yeah.
And the rest just goes along with it, right? I mean, so I don't care. You guys know, I don't care if you're black, white, Mexican, Canadian. Well, okay, if you're Canadian, screw off. But for the most part, I don't care. And so that's, I think, it's the way we have to look at society. Is that everybody has a right to voice your opinions, and that's the American way here. And I'm an American. God bless.
Yeah,
Or
that's
may
great.
or may not
Everything
exist.
better.
Yeah, and just for the record, guys, I know right off the bat we're going to have so many disagreements, but I'm really looking
I'm
forward
looking
to
forward to it. Yeah.
cordial conversation. I could tell you guys are respectful. You let you let others talk, and so I'm looking forward to the conversations.
Bring your friends.
I don't intend to do any Nick Fuentes,
Oh God.
name calling or any of that stuff. I simply want to have a philosophical debate or logical debate, whatever you
Do
want to
it.
call it.
I
Let's
love
do
that's
it,
what
man.
that's what I'm doing every weekend, every Saturday or Friday, depending on availability.
Awesome. I'm glad I
So
came across
make sure
your
you
page,
follow me.
man. That's great.
Make sure you follow me on YouTube as well. Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
All right, guys.
Appreciate you.
Good night, all. I'm gonna end the space, and we'll call it a night. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you, moderators. You guys have a great night. See you next weekend. Bye.
Take care.
Well, thanks. Bye.